Chapter 4297. Not long ago, this army received the news. The other three armies attacked one after another, but Kenshin took the opportunity to ambush them. Other than the army that attacked the Li tribe, where thousands of deserters survived, the other two armies were completely annihilated. When they heard the news, they thought they had misheard and were hallucinating. However, they were certain that this news was sent out by the three armies at the cost of their lives when they were attacked. After the news was reported to the Celestial King, the Celestial King checked it out before sending his messenger guards to relay the news to them. In other words, this news was confirmed by the Celestial King. It could not be fake. Thus, the two divine generals and the soldiers calmed down and thought about it. They guessed the crux of the matter. Kenshin had the ability to foresee the future. He actually predicted the Celestial King's plan. This was already very shocking. And he was able to rush from illusory sun-blessed ground to each cave residence in 3 days. His speed was unparalleled in the world. As for why he appeared outside the 3 cave residences at the same time and destroyed the 3 armies, it must be because he refined an avatar. However, other people could only refine 1 avatar, but he was different. He actually refined 3 avatars. No. It should be 4. If the Kenshin guarding illusory sun-blessed ground was Kenshin's original body, then there must be a 4th avatar. That sword god definitely had a 4th incarnation, and he was probably on his way here. His goal was to destroy them. After understanding this, the two divine generals no longer hesitated. They hurriedly gathered the soldiers to board the ship and prepare to evacuate. However, just as they were about to board the ship, they were met with a devastating attack. While the casualties were heavy, everyone guessed that Kenshin was here. Other than Kenshin, no one else would arrive at this time. They also did not have the strength and courage to rescue Shifeng Pavilion. Even though everyone was mentally prepared, when the sword god really appeared, everyone was still extremely terrified. That was why the soldiers were fleeing with all their might. It was a complete mess. No matter how the two divine generals gave orders, even if they swung their swords to cut down a few panicked deserters, they could not stop the chaos. In the end, it was Kenshin who used the heaven-destroying sword formation to seal off the area within a radius of 10,000 miles. Only then was the chaotic situation resolved. The soldiers who were fleeing blindly were blocked by the sword formation and could not escape. Only then did they obediently return to the formation and follow the orders of the two immortal generals to form a battle formation. At the moment of life and death, it was ironic that the enemy was more powerful than the general. Next, the two sides did not exchange much words and began to fight. More than 5,000 people against 1 Kenshin. The disparity was too great, and there was no suspense. But in reality, it was the Kenshin that slaughtered these soldiers. No one could hurt Kenshin. Even if hundreds of people worked together to cast their divine abilities and secret arts, they still couldn't touch him. On the other hand, it was Kenshin's divine abilities and sword techniques that could slaughter hundreds of soldiers with each move. The battle only lasted for half an hour before it ended. More than 5,000 soldiers were killed, and only the two divine generals survived to the very end. Before dying, one of the divine generals was covered in wounds and dripping with blood. He looked at Ji Tianqing in despair and said, "Kenshin truly lives up to his name. In terms of strength, tactics, and schemes, even the Celestial King is no match for you. Other than His Majesty the God Emperor, no one in the God realm can contend against you." The other divine general was filled with unwillingness. He stared at Ji Tianqing and asked in a hoarse voice, "How can you refine 4 avatars? How can just 1 avatar be so powerful?" Ji Tianqing looked at him and calmly replied, "It's not an avatar. The ones that were left in illusory sun-blessed land and destroyed the 3 armies were all my avatars." Hearing this, the divine general was stunned for a moment. His eyes that were filled with despair and darkness immediately lit up. "You mean, you're not an avatar, but Kenshin's true body?" Ji Tianqing nodded slightly in acknowledgement. The divine general threw his head back and laughed loudly. Blood sprayed out from his nose and mouth as he said in a muffled voice, "Ha ha ha, in comparison, we're much stronger than those 6 divine generals. At least we died under the sword of Kenshin's true body. It's more honorable than them." Being killed by Kenshin's true body was probably the last bit of comfort they could find in the midst of despair and death. Swoosh! Swoosh! Ji Tianqing raised his sword and swung it down. Blood splattered everywhere as 2 divine generals were killed, their heads separated from their bodies. He collected the spoils of war scattered among the ruins. He only picked up the space rings and quintessence shards of the 32 divine kings before turning to leave. At this point, the 4 armies had been destroyed by Ji Tianqing. Celestial King's plan had been thwarted. Ji Tianqing then picked up his communication jade slip and sent a message to Li Yuan, Feng Sunmi, Sect Master Yan Guang, and Pavilion Master Shifang. The contents of the messages were basically the same. It was to inform them that the armies that attacked their abodes had been destroyed. They no longer needed to be anxious and could continue their journey in peace. When they returned to their abodes, they would have to select elite disciples to be on standby at any time. Soon, Ji Tianqing would arrange tasks for them to start conquering the firmament land. In the center of the firmament land, in the mysterious and majestic heaven capital, Celestial King received the news that the 4th army that attacked Pavilion Master Shifang had also been destroyed. He was furious to the extreme and wanted nothing more than to tear the sword god into 1,000 pieces. In a fit of rage, he smashed a divine jade table and destroyed half of the hall. Many guards and generals were trembling in fear and kept quiet out of fear. All this time, the Empyrean God King had always been high and mighty, always confident in his plans and the pearl of wisdom. It was as if he had no opponents and had never encountered any setbacks or failures. However, since the first day Kenshin set foot on the firmament land, he had suffered one setback after another. His repeated failures made him lose all faith and his image as a powerhouse was completely torn apart. In front of Kenshin, his so-called wisdom, stratagems, and shrewdness seemed so stupid and even ridiculous. He was burning with anger and wanted to gather tens of thousands of troops to fight Kenshin to the death. However, after these failures, he finally understood something. Now, the initiative was in Kenshin's hands. Even if he was determined to fight Kenshin, he was afraid that he would not get what he wanted. The sword god might not fight him head-on, but he would definitely use all kinds of schemes to beat him into a sorry state, making him suffer a crushing defeat and become the laughingstock of the world. With this layer of scruples, no matter how angry Celestial King was, he did not dare to send out troops at will. He forced himself to calm down and think carefully about how to deal with this. If he could not come up with a good plan, then he could only gather all his forces and defend Heaven Capital until the end. Chapter 4298. For days passed quickly. Li Yuan, Feng Sunmi, Sect Master Yanguang, and Pavilion Master Shifang returned to their respective cave residences. After they returned to their residences, they explained the truth to the elders, deacons, and disciples under their command. The disciples of the 4 forces were very excited when they learned that Kenshin had resolved the crisis and saved them. Especially since the clan leaders and sect masters had pledged their loyalty to Kenshin. In other words, the disciples of the 4 forces had all become Kenshin's subordinates. Now that they had such a powerful backer, they felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off their shoulders and their hearts were at ease. Out of their excitement, gratitude, and admiration for Kenshin, the 4 forces used their intelligence network to spread the news. Before this, there had already been rumors spreading. Many forces and experts knew that Celestial King had sent out 4 armies to attack the Li tribe, Fengshuan tribe, Yanguang sect, and Shifang Pavilion. Celestial King did not dare to attack Kenshin, so he wanted to destroy the 4 forces to regain his dignity and turn the situation around. However, Kenshin was smart and predicted Celestial King's plan in advance, so he sent out a few clones to help. In the end, the 4 armies sent out by Celestial King were all destroyed by Kenshin. When the various forces and experts heard the news, they found it hard to believe. For the past 3 days, they had been discussing the matter and felt that it was too absurd and bizarre. However, after the 4 forces used various channels and methods to spread the news, the various forces and experts had no choice but to accept the truth. After all, the 4 forces were victims and participants in the whole thing. Not only did they have the right to speak, but they could also describe the process in detail and present various evidence. Even if the various forces and experts had doubts, they were all dispelled. When they accepted the truth, they were extremely shocked and were even more in awe and admiration of Kenshin's methods and schemes. Naturally, the mentality of some forces and experts was affected, and their attitudes and standpoints changed. At the very least, in the next few days, the wills of several ancient clans and top factions were shaken. Their elders, protectors, hall leaders, and other experts began to have disagreements and started to debate whether to support Kenshin or pledge loyalty to Kenshin. The situation in Firmament Land gradually became clear. Between Celestial King and Kenshin, only one would survive and rule the land. Therefore, if they wanted to benefit from the turmoil and change, they had to face the question of whether to pledge loyalty to Celestial King or Kenshin. The experts of the various forces were also debating about this question. Of course, some clans and forces were determined to remain neutral and observe the situation. They didn't want to make progress, but they also didn't want to get into trouble. They continued to be silent bystanders. A few days later, the relevant news spread across Firmament Land. The people of almost 100 regions, thousands of empires, and almost 10,000 divine kingdoms heard the news one after another. Everyone was shocked by this, but at the same time, they were very excited. They hoped that Kenshin would come to Firmament Land and overthrow the Nebula God Emperor's rule and restore freedom to everyone. Now, their dreams and wishes were coming true. After Kenshin came to Firmament Land, he did not hide for long. Instead, he made a high-profile appearance. Moreover, in just a few days, Kenshin participated in 2 battles in a row and won in a crushing manner. The facts proved that Kenshin was not only stronger than Celestial King, but also much more shrewd and cunning. This allowed all the citizens to see hope and increased their confidence. This matter was spread everywhere among the commoners. When the commoners discussed the related news, they all worshipped the sword god. Even the rulers and nobles of the kingdoms and empires were shocked and in awe of Kenshin's wisdom and cunning. They were not qualified to participate in the battle between Celestial King and Kenshin. They could only guard their own territories and observe the situation quietly. No matter who won in the end, as long as they were not too unlucky, they would still be able to control their own territories. Of course, there was not much difference between being loyal to Celestial King and being loyal to Kenshin. The only difference was that if they were loyal to Celestial King, the people in their territories would be slaves and would not be free. If they were loyal to Kenshin, all the people would regain their freedom and would no longer be oppressed and exploited. For the rulers of the kingdoms and kingdoms, their power would be greatly reduced. Therefore, many rulers and nobles still hoped that Celestial King would win and let them maintain the status quo. A few days were enough for the 4 forces to select 1,000 elite disciples. The clan leaders, faction leaders and pavilion leaders did not receive any orders from Kenshin. They led the 1,000 disciples to practice various battle formations and joint attacks. As for Kenshin's whereabouts and plans, no one knew for the time being. The clan leaders and faction leaders thought that Kenshin would most likely return to Illusory Sun-blessed land after rescuing them. However, Ji Tianqing did not plan to return after leaving a doppelganger in Illusory Sun-blessed land. He did not meet up with his 3 doppelganger either. Instead, he divided into 4 groups and began to wander around the Firmament Land. Every time he arrived at a region, he would try to sneak into the domain chief's manor and use various tricks to create chaos in the domain chief's manor. When the time was right, he would kill the guards of the domain chief's manor. In the end, he destroyed the entire domain chief's manor by himself. He killed or captured all the guards and drove the rest away. As for the domain chief's manor, he sealed it with a formation. Unless he cast the spell himself or had the token to unlock the seal, no one could enter or leave. He and his 3 doppelganger attacked the various domain chiefs' mansions. Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, Bai Feng and the others also divided into several groups to carry out the same task. A few days later, Ji Tianqing issued another order to the 5 forces. Each force sent out 1,000 elite soldiers to attack the domain chiefs' mansions in each region. After occupying them, they would seal them with a formation. The domain chief had already brought the elite masters to Heaven Capital in the occupied domain chiefs' mansions. The forces left behind in the domain chief's mansions were not strong. Therefore, the operation of Ji Tianqing and his subordinates was very smooth, and they did not encounter any setbacks. In just 1 month, they had attacked and occupied more than 40 domain chiefs' mansions. As a result, the more than 40 regions were leaderless and panicked. Of course, there were still some domain chief who did not rush to Heaven Capital as ordered. After Ji Tianqing and his soldiers arrived, few of the domain chief's mansions resisted. They all surrendered obediently. Therefore, Ji Tianqing and his subordinates took out the jade slips that they had prepared beforehand and asked the domain chief to swear their surrender. In this way, one region after another fell and broke away from the control of the Celestial King. Book House Reading Website. Chapter 4299. The soldiers of the Rebel Alliance's branch in the Firmament Continent ignored the massive forces gathered in Heaven Capital and focused on conquering all the regions in the Firmament Continent. They divided into more than a dozen groups, constantly attacking and conquering one region after another. The commoners of the various regions cheered and jumped for joy, celebrating and excited. However, the dignitaries and emperors in those regions were uneasy. They were afraid that the Rebel Alliance would destroy them too. Fortunately, the experts of the Rebel Alliance had a clear goal. They wanted to clear out the domain chiefs' mansions in all regions and seal them as soon as possible. They were not interested in any other people or forces other than that. Many people, onlookers, and experts were thinking that the Rebel Alliance's forces were scattered and they were attacking and sealing the domain chiefs' mansions. This was the Rebel Alliance's weakest moment. It was also the best time for the Celestial King to fight back. As long as he decisively sent troops to attack, even if he could not wipe out all the Rebel Alliance, he could at least kill more than half of the Rebel Alliance. Many people thought that the Celestial King could not help but take action. Even many people in the Rebel Alliance, especially the experts of the 5 forces, thought so. They had been worried that the Celestial King would send troops to intercept them or attack their nest. That would be a big problem. However, when they told Ji Tianqing about their thoughts, Ji Tianqing told them with certainty that the Celestial King did not have the courage and determination to do so. Although it sounded unreasonable, everyone chose to believe in Kenshin. They dispelled their worries and continued to carry out the mission. The reason why Ji Tianqing was so certain was because he had figured out Empyrean God King's nature. Before he arrived at the Firmament Continent, the Celestial King and countless experts and forces knew that he would come. At that time, he had already conquered the boundless Heaven Continent and the Reincarnation Island. He was very famous and was invincible among the 5 God Emperors. Even though the Celestial King had a large number of troops in his hands, he still felt uneasy and placed himself in the position of the weak. After Ji Tianqing arrived at the Firmament Land, he first killed General Nan Feng and his 10,000 soldiers. Then, he showed up in a high-profile manner. This not only won him the cheers and support of the people, but also put a lot of pressure on the Celestial King. As a result, the Celestial King did not dare to fight with him. He could only avoid him and send troops to attack the Li tribe, the Fengshuan tribe, the Yanguang sect, and the Shifang Pavilion. In the end, the Celestial King's plot was predicted by him, and he personally intercepted and killed him. The 36,000 men of the four armies were almost completely wiped out. This was yet another devastating blow to the Celestial King. At this moment, the Celestial King was already irritable and worried about his gains and losses. It was impossible for him to remain calm and rational. As the saying goes, once, twice, and never thrice. Celestial King had lost twice to Kenshin, and it was a complete loss. Whether in terms of strength, means, or shrewdness, he was completely crushed by Kenshin. The Firmament Land had already spread a rumor that he had become a laughingstock. Celestial King had a strong sense of self-esteem. How could he let Kenshin crush him for the third time? In his opinion, Kenshin was cunning and cunning. Such an obvious flaw must have been deliberately set up by Kenshin to lure him into action so that he could take advantage of the opportunity to deal a heavy blow to him. The easier it seemed to be, the more likely it was to be a trap. For the past month, the Celestial King was determined to defend Heaven Capital. No matter how the Rebel Alliance attacked the city outside, he was determined not to take action. Even if many of the territorial masters and generals under his command advised him, he ignored them. The territorial masters and generals said that the Rebel Alliance's forces were all deployed. They were scattered into dozens of routes to attack the territorial masters' mansions. What other conspiracy could Kenshin have? As long as they sent out troops at this time, they could definitely annihilate half of the Rebel Alliance. Moreover, Kenshin was too busy to rescue them in time. It seemed that the territorial masters and generals' words were very reasonable and won the support of many soldiers. However, Celestial King refuted them with a few words. What you see is only the surface. How do you know that this is not Kenshin's scheme? You are not Kenshin. How can you be sure that he is too busy to rescue them in time? We have already suffered 2 losses and suffered so many casualties. Why haven't you learned your lesson? I am sure that as long as we send out troops, Kenshin will definitely take them all and leave no one alive. There is nothing that Kenshin can't do that you can't think of. The realm masters and generals were rendered speechless. They could only give up on the idea of sending troops to battle. Indeed, on the surface, it seemed that Kenshin only had a few troops under his command. It was impossible for him to set up any more traps and ambushes. However, who could be sure? The Sword God was someone who was good at creating miracles. As Celestial King said, there was nothing that Kenshin couldn't think of. On the other hand, the illusory Sun Sect Master was Ji Tianqing's most trusted subordinate in Firmament Mainland. He had also asked Ji Tianqing why he was so sure. Ji Tianqing smiled and said, Celestial King has been defeated twice in a row. He has become the laughingstock of the people in Firmament Mainland. He has been described as stupid, childish, and ridiculous. With his self-esteem, how can he accept such slander and ridicule? He has been traumatized by me. Now, he doesn't want to achieve anything, he just wants to avoid any mistakes. Even if we go all out, he won't dare to send out troops and split up his troops to kill us. Because he will firmly believe that this is a trap and a conspiracy set by me. Even if we seem to be full of flaws, they are flaws that I deliberately showed to him. After listening to Ji Tianqing's explanation, the illusory Sun Sect Master suddenly understood and quickly replied, Sir Kenshin is brilliant. You have grasped the psychology of Celestial King very accurately. You have seen through his mind. Compared to you, he is really stupid. Ji Tianqing smiled again and said, Celestial King has made up his mind not to attack easily. He will defend Heaven Capital and wait for the final battle. Therefore, we will smoothly occupy the 100 territories and control all the domain chiefs' mansions. However, the forces of the Rebel Alliance are too weak to be compared with the forces under Celestial King's command. Sky Universe had already lost 45,000 soldiers in the 2 previous battles, but Skuniverse God King still hadn't fully recovered. However, there are still 50,000 soldiers in Heaven Capital. They are still strictly defending and the city is impregnable. Therefore, we can't forcibly attack Heaven Capital and fight Celestial King." Hearing this, the illusory Sun sect master nodded in agreement. He asked with some concern, "Sir, what should we do after we conquer the 100 territories?" Ji Tianqing said calmly, "I have a plan. You just need to follow the order step by step. When the time is right, you will naturally understand." Chapter 4300. After more than a month of contact, the head of the Xuanri sect gained Ji Tianqing's trust and high regard. Even Ji Tianqing's attitude towards him was different from that of the leaders of the other four forces. Ji Tianqing didn't explain much to Li Yuan, Feng Sunmi, the head of the Yanguang sect, and the Shifang pavilion master. The four experts didn't dare to ask too much and just carried out their tasks according to his orders. Only the head of the Xuanri sect would take the initiative to figure out Ji Tianqing's ideas and plans, and he would find out and fill in the gaps in time, trying to make Ji Tianqing worry as little as possible. It turned out that Ji Tianqing only needed to give a general direction and plan for more than a month. The head of the Xuanri sect would take the initiative to solve many small and side issues without Ji Tianqing's order. It was because of this that Ji Tianqing valued him even more. The reason why he explained so much to him was that he wanted to train him and teach him some ideas. In this way, Ji Tianqing would be more assured when he left the firmament land and handed over the power to the head of the Xuanri sect. Unknowingly, 2 months had passed. With the efforts of various experts of the Rebel Alliance, they finally conquered 99 territories. Among them, 78 domain lords were ordered to lead troops to Tiandu. Their territory leaders' mansions were emptied and sealed by a formation. The other 21 territory leaders were not ordered to go to Heaven Capital. They stayed in the territory leaders' mansions and were forced to swear allegiance to Kenshin. In this way, the 100 territories of the firmament land were temporarily controlled by the Rebel Alliance. Only the firmament territory where Heaven Capital was located was not invaded by the Rebel Alliance. Next, the Rebel Alliance only needed to conquer the firmament territory and occupy Heaven Capital. Then they could completely control the firmament land. But everyone knew that the real decisive battle was yet to come. The Rebel Alliance had been going smoothly. The most dangerous and difficult part was to attack Heaven Capital. These 2 months were too long for the people of the firmament land. They waited anxiously. To the nobles and emperors of the 100 territories, these 2 months were extremely torturous and frightening. As for the domain lords and soldiers in Tiandu, these 2 months could be said to be the most sullen. They knew that the members of the Rebel Alliance had split into more than a dozen groups to invade their homes and the domain chief's manor, but they could do nothing about it. They knew that the people of the firmament land would laugh at them and ridicule them, but they could only stay in Heaven Capital and could not take a single step out of it. Who could understand that kind of anger, humiliation, and helplessness? Over the past 2 months, the dozens of domain masters and tens of thousands of soldiers were full of complaints. Their negative and lazy moods were very serious. In the past, they respected and revered the Celestial King because the Celestial King was powerful and wise. Over the past few months, they had seen with their own eyes that the Celestial King's disguise was torn apart, revealing his true colors of brutality, suspicion, and incompetence. The Celestial King's position in the hearts of the soldiers had also plummeted. After putting aside their reverence, the loyalty of the dozens of domain masters and tens of thousands of soldiers to him would also decline. There were even many rumors circulating among the tens of thousands of soldiers in Tiandu. Many people secretly said that the Celestial King was scared by the Kenshin and did not have the courage to fight again, so he chose to hide in Heaven Capital. Some people also said that the Celestial King did not see the overall situation and only cared about his own face, so he had missed the best opportunity to fight back. Of course, the Celestial King was not as incompetent as the soldiers said. It was just that he met the Kenshin and was played in the palm of his hand, so he appeared to be so stupid, suspicious, and timid. In addition, the rumors and slanders that were circulating among the soldiers were also heard by the Celestial King's spies. When the spies and informants reported the rumors to the Celestial King was undoubtedly furious. Without any hesitation or consideration, he directly issued an order to arrest those who spread the rumors and slanders, execute them in public, and kill them without mercy. As soon as the order was issued, more than 500 soldiers were arrested and beheaded in public within 3 days. This caused a sensation and panic in Heaven Capital. Tens of thousands of soldiers were scared into silence and no longer dared to criticize the Celestial King behind his back. But the soldiers only surrendered on the surface, and their disgust, contempt, and disgust for the Celestial King became even more serious. In their view, only a cowardly and incompetent person would be so vicious to the soldiers under his command. In just a few days, some news accidentally leaked by the Rebel Alliance began to spread in the Firmament mainland. According to rumors, a certain clan leader, whose name could not be revealed, had always been careless, without any scheming or shrewdness. 2 months ago, this person had to lead his people on a mission and was ordered to keep his mouth shut by the Kenshin, so he did not dare to reveal any information. However, at the celebration banquet a few days ago, this patriarch Li got drunk and spoke the truth after drinking, wantonly mocking the Celestial King. He laughed that the Celestial King was as timid as a mouse and had long been scared out of his wits by the Kenshin. The Rebel Alliance formed by the Kenshin only had 5 forces, and they did not have time to expand and absorb more forces. 2 months ago, the 5 forces of the Rebel Alliance came out in full force, divided into more than a dozen groups, and conquered various regions one by one. That was the perfect time for the Celestial King to counterattack the Rebel Alliance, as he could easily send out 10 or 20,000 troops and kill half of the people of the Rebel Alliance. But unexpectedly, the Celestial King was so timid, cowardly, and incompetent that he hid in Heaven Capital and watched the Kenshin conquer the entire Firmament mainland. Facing such a powerful and intelligent master like the Kenshin, the Celestial King was so stupid that he paled in comparison. Somehow, this Patriarch Li's drunken mantra spread out through some channels and quickly spread across the Firmament land. Hundreds of millions of people laughed and laughed at the Celestial King unscrupulously when they heard the news. They guessed right, the Celestial King was really scared out of his wits. When the nobles, masters, and top forces heard the news, they were first shocked by the strategy and courage of the Kenshin, and then felt sad and ashamed for the Celestial King. Of course, there were also a few masters who doubted the authenticity of this news, wondering if it was fake news deliberately released by the Kenshin. But the news that spread later proved the authenticity of this rumor. It was said that the Patriarch Li was scolded by the Kenshin for a slip of the tongue after he was drunk. He was whipped 100 times by the Thunder God's whip in public and was also punished by not drinking for 100 years. Every 2 days, the Rebel Alliance would release a declaration of rebellion, calling for the ambitious and top forces of the Firmament mainland to join the Rebel Alliance and overthrow the dark reign of the Nebula God Emperor. From this incident, it could be seen that the Kenshin only had 5 forces under his command. They were seriously short of military strength and could not attack Heaven Capital. Chapter 4301. The Kenshin's punishment of the drunken Li Yuan and the Rebel Alliance's declaration of rebellion were enough to prove that the Celestial King had missed the best opportunity to counterattack. Hundreds of millions of people, nobles, and experts all believed that the Rebel Alliance was indeed lacking in military strength. And the Celestial King's paranoia and timidity were confirmed, and he was ridiculed by the people of the entire continent. For a time, the Celestial King's prestige and reputation fell to the bottom, and he became the biggest laughingstock. Although the Rebel Alliance was lacking in military strength, everyone was full of confidence in the Kenshin. They firmly believed that the Kenshin would definitely be able to break through Tiandu and defeat the Celestial King. At the same time, the Celestial King and the tens of thousands of soldiers in Tiandu also received a series of news. When they learned that Li Yuan had spoken the truth after drinking and was punished by the Kenshin, and that the Rebel Alliance was publicly recruiting capable people, the entire Tiandu was in an uproar. The tens of thousands of soldiers finally confirmed that their previous guesses were correct. The rumors and slanders that had been circulating among the soldiers and the criticism of the Celestial King were all confirmed. That's right, the previous 2 months were when the Rebel Alliance's forces were scattered and at their weakest. It was because the Celestial King was scared out of his wits and was too afraid of the Kenshin that he missed the best opportunity to counterattack. The Celestial King cared too much about his reputation and face, and did not care about the lives of the soldiers, nor did he care about the homes of the dozens of domain masters and tens of thousands of soldiers. The main culprit that caused the current passive situation was the Celestial King. As the saying goes, a stone stirs up 1,000 ripples. The dozens of domain masters and tens of thousands of soldiers counted old and new grudges together, and all kinds of emotions surged in their hearts, and they became very agitated. Those domain masters already had complaints about the Celestial King, and now they hated the Celestial King's muddle-headedness that caused their caves and territories to be occupied by the Rebel Alliance for nothing. Tens of thousands of soldiers also ignored the military order and criticized the Celestial King everywhere, saying that he was muddle-headed and incompetent. Even the ordinary soldiers knew that the previous 2 months were the best time to counterattack, but the Celestial King was stubborn and refused to send a single soldier. If this wasn't incompetence, then what was? Therefore, the tens of thousands of soldiers were agitated, and all their accumulated resentment towards the Celestial King exploded. Although they still had a bottom line, there were no mutinies or defections. However, the mentality of the tens of thousands of soldiers had changed. Their loyalty to the Celestial King had also fallen to the lowest point. Countless soldiers became lazy, passive, and lazy. Those who were supposed to be on sentry duty did not go, and those who were supposed to be patrolling and carrying out missions were lazy and unwilling. Even though the 50,000 soldiers were pieced together by many powers and dozens of domain lords. However, negativity and complaining can be contagious and spread quickly. The Celestial King's trusted generals and spies found that the situation was not good, and promptly reported to the Celestial King. At this time, Empyrean God King had locked himself in his study, venting his anger and humiliation in a fit of rage. Without a doubt, when the corresponding news spread in the firmament mainland, he had become synonymous with incompetence and stupidity, and had become the biggest joke in the world. In the entire firmament mainland, the angriest, the most embarrassed, and the most humiliated person was him. Kenshin did not need to do anything, nor did he need to use any tricks. He only needed to figure out his nature and psychology, and use a mixture of truth and lies to successfully take over 99 domains, and also humiliate him severely. At this time, the Celestial King was so humiliated that he wanted to find a hole to hide in. He locked himself in his study, unwilling to see anyone, including his trusted generals. He madly smashed things, roaring hysterically, and smashing the spacious and luxurious study into a mess, almost turning it into a ruin. After a few hours, he finally calmed down from his mania, and fell into the ruins with a gloomy look. He hesitated for a long time, and then walked into a secret room in the underground palace, and activated a special formation to contact the Nebula God Emperor in the depths of the void. Now, the Celestial King could not find anyone to help him, and could only confide in the Nebula God Emperor, and ask for guidance from the Nebula God Emperor. Although the Nebula God Emperor was far away in the depths of the void, and could not rush back in time, and could not rush back to the firmament mainland. However, the Nebula God Emperor was the Celestial King's last support, and as long as he could get the Nebula God Emperor's comfort, guidance, he would be more confident. No one knew what the Celestial King and the Nebula God Emperor talked about alone in the secret room. His trusted subordinates and generals only saw that 4 hours later, when he appeared in the Great Council Hall, his expression and emotions had returned to normal. Even so, Empyrean God King's calm demeanor still made the generals tremble with fear and dread. Even when the generals reported the news, they lowered their heads in fear, and their voices were much lower. The generals reported 2 things. First, the tens of thousands of soldiers guarding heaven capital were agitated, and their prejudice against the celestial king was very great. There were already signs of a mutiny, and they asked the celestial king to suppress it as soon as possible. Hearing this news, the celestial king frowned, and anger appeared on his face again. According to his original intention, his first reaction was to catch a group of soldiers who took the lead in causing trouble, and behead them in public to frighten all the soldiers. Then, he would gather dozens of domain masters and many immortal generals, and severely reprimand them, and order them to control the people under their command. But the celestial king remembered the teachings of the Nebula God Emperor. The more intense and cruel the situation was, the more he could not use his usual fierce and cruel methods. Otherwise, it would only be counterproductive, and stimulate the soldiers' rebellious mentality. Originally, there were only signs of a mutiny, but it would become a real mutiny and rebellion. Thus, the celestial king calmed down, and said to his trusted generals, This is the Kenshin's conspiracy, deliberately releasing the news to make the soldiers misunderstand me. This is a scheme to drive a wedge between us. Let those simple-minded soldiers think carefully. The people under the Kenshin have all made a heavenly oath. How could there be such a thing as a slip of the tongue after drinking? Also, the Rebel Alliance's public recruitment of soldiers is also a show for everyone to see. Tell those immortal generals and domain masters, if they can't even understand such a simple principle, they should quickly resign and get out of heaven capital. The trusted general pondered for a moment, and felt that this was the right way to put it. He quickly nodded and said, This subordinate obeys, I will pass on your order later. Then, he reported the second thing to the celestial king. According to the report of the scouts, more than a dozen groups of people of the Rebel Alliance had basically joined the Kenshin, and were currently resting in the illusory sun paradise. Only 1,000 disciples of the Shifang Pavilion were rushing to the Domain Master's mansion in the realm of Green Heaven, preparing to attack it. The last unoccupied Domain Master's mansion on the whole continent was listed as one of the tasks of the Shifang Pavilion. Even though the Shifang Pavilion was under great pressure, it had to be completed. According to their estimated speed, they would arrive tomorrow morning at the latest. Chapter 4302. Hearing the news from his trusted general, Celestial King raised his eyebrows, and a light flashed through his eyes. He was keenly aware of something, and an idea flashed through his mind, but he couldn't grasp it in time. Therefore, he frowned and fell into deep thought. The trusted general saw that he was thinking about a problem, so he tactfully bowed and did not disturb him. He turned around and was about to leave. But Celestial King stopped him and ordered in a dignified tone, Pass down my order, let divine generals Qi, Lu, and Lu gather 6,000 troops and wait for my orders. The trusted general was stunned for a moment, but he didn't think much and asked, My lord, are you going to send troops out? But those soldiers are passive and slack, and their morale is low. I'm afraid it will be difficult for them to form an army, and they won't be able to exert much combat power. Celestial King said expressionlessly, Don't forget what I said before, you have to let those leaders and soldiers understand that this is all Kenshin's plot to drive a wedge between us. Besides, the soldiers have been staying in Heaven Capital for 2 months and can't go in or out, watching the 100 territories being occupied by Kenshin. That's why they have so many complaints. Now that I'm finally going to take action, the soldiers can also go out. How can they be passive and slack off? As long as you give the order, I'm sure many soldiers will eagerly sign up to follow divine generals Qi, Lu, and Lu. Seeing that Celestial King was so determined, the trusted general didn't say more and chose to believe him. My lord, are you sending 3 divine generals with 6,000 troops to intercept and kill the 1,000 disciples of Shifang Pavilion? Now the forces of Kenshin and the Rebel Alliance are concentrated in illusory sun-blessed land, but the people of Shifang Pavilion are in the realm of Green Heaven. The distance between the 2 places is 5 days. No matter what, Kenshin won't be able to support them in time. It's reasonable to say that this is a good time to kill the disciples of Shifang Pavilion. The trusted general's tone was calm as he analyzed the situation unhurriedly. After pondering for a moment, he advised, "But we've closed the exit of Heaven Capital for 2 months, and we've decided to defend Heaven Capital. Will there be any problems if we open the exit now? Besides, Kenshin has always been cunning and unpredictable. Don't you want to reconsider?" This trusted general was not only powerful, but also wise and resourceful. He had been Celestial King's military advisor for many years. He was keenly aware that the current situation was a bit strange. Kenshin shouldn't have made such a low-level mistake by separating from Shifang Pavilion and sending them to the vicinity of Heaven Capital. This was like a hunter dangling a piece of fat meat in front of a tiger to test whether the tiger would dare to pounce and bite it. Therefore, the trusted general felt that this was very likely a conspiracy. However, he could not say it out loud. He could only remind the Celestial King in a roundabout way. However, the Celestial King did not care about his reminder. He was still stubborn. He sneered and said, "Carefully consider what? Kenshin was still so far away from the other 4 factions, what was there to be afraid of? Kenshin has repeatedly tested my bottom line. His success in the past 2 months has not only humiliated me, it has also made him incomparably arrogant. Now, 1,000 disciples of Shifang Pavilion dare to come to the realm of Green Heaven and show off in front of me. If I don't decisively send troops to destroy them, when they occupy the domain chief's mansion in the realm of Green Heaven, I will become a complete coward. Could it be that you still want those ignorant lowly commoners to continue laughing at me?" It was true that the domain chief's mansion in the realm of Green Heaven was only half a day away from the entrance of Heaven Capital. There were only 1,000 disciples of Shifang Pavilion, but they dared to attack the domain chief's mansion. This was simply challenging the Celestial King's bottom line. If he could even endure this, then he would really be a coward and a coward. Seeing the Celestial King was angry, the trusted general hurriedly bowed and apologized, explaining that he did not mean to offend. The Celestial King did not want to talk nonsense. He waved his sleeve and asked him to leave. The trusted general bowed and left carefully to carry out the order. However, the Celestial King ignored a problem. When the 99 domains of the realm of Green Heaven were all occupied by the Rebel Alliance, the range of his intelligence force's activities was greatly reduced. Under normal circumstances, any important news that happened in the realm of Green Heaven could be delivered to him on the same day. But now, the intelligence force's activities were limited. Only 1 spy was left in the illusionary sun-blessed land. As a result, the news that the Celestial King just received, confirming that the Kenshin and the 4 forces were still in the illusionary sun-blessed land, was actually something that happened yesterday. Just last night, 4,000 elite disciples of the 4 forces had boarded the god-slaying battleship of the Kenshin and quietly left the illusionary sun-blessed land. The god-slaying battleship concealed its whereabouts and aura. Without alerting anyone, it embarked on the journey to the north. As for its destination, of course, it was the realm of Green Heaven. Of course, the specific destination was the domain chief's mansion of Green Heaven or Heaven Capital. That was unknown. As far as the Celestial King and countless people knew, the illusionary sun-blessed land was 5 days away from the realm of Green Heaven. But the god-slaying battleship's speed was shocking. It would take at most 2 days to arrive at the realm of Green Heaven. In addition, the Celestial King guessed at the Shifang Pavilion alone and only 1,000 disciples dared to attack the domain chief's mansion of Green Heaven. It might be Kenshin's plot to test his bottom line and reaction. In fact, he guessed right. It was indeed Ji Tianqing's plan. Just as he said to the master of the illusionary sun sect a month ago, he had already thought of a follow-up plan. And the Shifang Pavilion alone and going to the domain chief's mansion of Green Heaven as bait were all part of his plan. The trusted general of the Celestial King was the leader of his trusted subordinates. His name was Xie Fengyi and his title was Immortal King Fengyi. He was the uncrowned military counselor. The reason why the celestial king didn't have the position of military counselor was that his vanity made trouble. It was because he felt that his wisdom was unparalleled, and he could devise strategies in a tent. If he had the position of military counselor, it would make him seem brainless and not wise enough. Immortal King Fengyi had the strength of the 9th layer of the Immortal King realm. He had great prestige under the Celestial King's command. Even though the dozens of domain lords and tens of thousands of soldiers were disappointed and complained about the Celestial King's incompetence. But they still maintained enough respect and courtesy to Immortal King Fengyi. Immortal King Fengyi used his eloquence and prestige to explain to the many domain lords and soldiers that the news and rumors from the outside world were all Kenshin's plan to drive a wedge between them. After explaining clearly, he tried his best to comfort the tens of thousands of soldiers. In this way, the soldiers' negative and lazy mood dissipated by more than half. Although the morale was still not high, the soldiers were already thankful that they were willing to carry out the mission and patrol as usual. Immediately after, Immortal King Fengyi announced the Celestial King's order. He asked the 3 immortal generals Qi, Lu, and Lu to gather 6,000 soldiers and leave Heaven Capital to kill the disciples of the Shifang Pavilion. Just as the Celestial King expected, the soldiers could finally enter and leave Heaven Capital. There was a battle to fight. They were all excited and enthusiastically signed up. The Apex. Chapter 4303. In just half an hour, Divine Generals Qi, Lu, and Lu had selected 6,000 soldiers and arranged them in formation. Divine King Fengyi held the Celestial King's token and read the order in front of everyone, sending 6,000 soldiers to battle. After saluting, the 3 divine generals and the 6,000 soldiers were full of ambition and pride as they valiantly set off. Those divine generals who didn't receive the order and soldiers who weren't selected were disappointed and envious as they watched the army set off. They had been idling in Heaven Capital for so long that they wanted to rush out and fight to vent their frustrations. But unfortunately, this precious opportunity was taken away by the 6,000 soldiers. Divine King Fengyi saw that the soldiers were disappointed and envious, so he comforted them. Don't worry, everyone. Lord Tianyu has seen through Kenshin's conspiracy and has already arranged a plan. This is just the beginning of our counterattack. There will be more opportunities for you to go out and fight to your heart's content. As long as we have the initiative, we can't let Kenshin attack Heaven Capital. Instead, we will destroy his soldiers. Divine King Fengyi's words allowed the thousands of soldiers to see hope. They rallied their morale and regained their morale. Divine Generals Qi, Lu, and Lu led the 6,000 soldiers and arrived at the exit of Heaven Capital with high morale. The entrance and exit that had been sealed off before was now opened by the guards who were guarding this place. Swoosh! When the 6,000 soldiers arrived, the exit of the defensive formation was opened and a magnificent light gate that was hundreds of meters high appeared in the sky. In order to show the majesty and dominance of Heaven Capital, even the space gate at the exit of the formation was set up so huge. The 6,000 soldiers lined up in formation and stepped through the huge light gate one by one, leaving Heaven Capital. Outside Tiandu, in the vast and boundless sky, the 3 divine generals took out their divine ships and allowed the 6,000 soldiers to board one after another. Although it was only half a day's journey from Heaven Capital to Firmament Domain Chief's mansion, they couldn't let the 6,000 soldiers fly. Not only would it be too slow, but it would also consume a lot of the soldiers' strength. After a quarter of an hour, the 6,000 soldiers all boarded the divine ship and set off for Firmament Domain Chief's mansion. Throughout the entire process, nearly 1,000 guards at the entrance of Tiandu stared at the soldiers with eyes full of envy. Although the commanders of the guards were all inferior and middle divine kings, they were relaxed. However, everyone was relaxed and focused their attention on the 6,000 soldiers. No one could detect that there was an invisible figure who had concealed his aura. He brushed past the 6,000 soldiers, passed through the 100 zhang tall light gate, and entered Heaven Capital. To be able to fly past thousands of people at such a close distance without exposing one's tracks and aura, only a peak divine king level expert would be able to do so. There was only one peak divine king in the entire firmament mainland, and that was Empyrean divine king. The invisible figure that had concealed his aura was naturally not him. Instead, it was Ji Tianqing, who was riding the deity-slaying battleship and rushing to the entrance of Heaven Capital at the fastest speed possible. In order to reach the destination in the shortest time possible, he did not hesitate to spend resources worth tens of millions every hour to provide energy for the deity-slaying battleship, allowing it to travel 3 times faster. In this 1 day and a half, the god-slaying battleship had consumed close to 200 million god stones worth of resources. Fortunately, the god-slaying battleship had arrived 15 minutes ago. At that time, Ji Tianqing was still 100,000 li away when he detected that the exit of Tiandu had opened. 6,000 soldiers had just left Tiandu. He hurriedly put away the deity-slaying battleship and quietly approached alone. At the most suitable time, he easily sneaked into Heaven Capital. Without a doubt, this was another miracle. No one could believe that Kenshin, who was still in illusory sun-blessed land the day before yesterday, had actually infiltrated Heaven Capital today. This was too unbelievable, too preposterous. The entrance and exit of Tiandu had been closed for more than 2 months, and no one had entered or exited. Until today, when the 6,000 soldiers set out, the entrance was temporarily opened, and it only lasted for 15 minutes before closing again. How could Kenshin take advantage of such a coincidence to sneak into Tiandu? In fact, this was not a coincidence. Everything that had happened before, including the news that Celestial King had received, were all part of his plan. At present, things were developing according to his expectations, without the slightest deviation. Ji Tianqing had told the master of the illusory sun sect a long time ago. The 5 forces together only had 5,000 disciples. With such a small force, it was impossible to attack Heaven Capital and contend with 50,000 soldiers. If he wanted to break into Heaven Capital and defeat Celestial King, he could only use a trick. But the master of the illusory sun sect, like the masters of the other 4 forces, could not guess what kind of trick Ji Tianqing was going to use. If they knew that Ji Tianqing had sneaked into Heaven Capital alone and directly attacked the root of the problem, the masters of the 5 forces would be stunned. Obviously, the people of the 5 forces did not know about this. Needless to say, the people of the Shifeng Pavilion were still on their way to the main mansion of the Firmament Domain. And the people of the illusory sun sect, the Li tribe, the Fengshuan tribe, and the Yanguang sect had been staying in the Deity Slayer battleship. They did not know what was going on outside, nor did they know where Ji Tianqing would take them. Anyway, they were resting in the battleship and waiting for Ji Tianqing's orders at any time. The 6,000 soldiers left on the 3 deity battleships, and the defense formation of Heaven Capital was closed. At this time, Ji Tianqing had already wandered around Heaven Capital and began to investigate the military situation. He didn't tell his soldiers that he had a seemingly crazy plan to defeat Empyrean Deity King and conquer the Firmament continent. He wanted to create a miracle. Using only 5,000 elite disciples of the 5 forces to conquer Heaven Capital and defeat 50,000 soldiers. This plan was not only crazy, but also absurd. Anyone who heard it would feel it was incredible and unbelievable. Therefore, Ji Tianqing did not tell anyone in advance, but took action directly. Of course, in order to accomplish such a heaven-defying miracle and feat, it was not something that could be achieved by risking his life. After he sneaked into Heaven Capital, he planned to understand the situation first, and then make a detailed plan. The main purpose was to sow discord and destroy. First, he would make Heaven Capital chaotic, and it would be best to make tens of thousands of soldiers mutiny. When Heaven Capital was in chaos, and the 50,000 soldiers lost their fighting capacity, his goal would be achieved, and the miracle would come true. But this required time, patience, and more importantly, strategy and means. The 3 immortal generals Qi, Lu, and Lu led the 6,000 soldiers and rushed to the main mansion of the Firmament Domain on the deity battleship. The Firmament Domain was the most important domain among the 100 regions in the Firmament continent. The master of the domain had a very high status. Not only did he often come in and out of Heaven Capital, but he was also the favorite of the Celestial King. He was also deeply trusted and valued by the Nebula God Emperor. Therefore, when the Celestial King issued the summons 2 months ago, dozens of domain masters entered Heaven Capital, including the master of the Firmament Domain. Chapter 4304. When the Lord of Firmament Domain was ordered to go to Heaven Capital, he took away 70% of the Domain Chief's mansion's forces, which made the defense of the Domain Chief's mansion weak. However, the defense array of the Domain Chief's mansion was closed and no one was allowed to enter or leave. The remaining 2,000 guards and 3,000 servants only needed to stay in the Domain Chief's mansion. In the opinion of the Lord of Firmament Domain, if even his Domain Chief's mansion was attacked, the entire Firmament land would have fallen. In that case, even if his Domain Chief's mansion was occupied, it would not be a big deal. Moreover, the Celestial King would definitely send a large number of troops to wipe out the Kenshin forces. He would never allow that to happen. This was his idea 2 months ago. Who knew that it would come true? Although the 2,000 guards and 3,000 servants who stayed in the Domain Chief's mansion could not enter or leave the Domain Chief's mansion, they could still communicate with the outside world. They had already known that the disciples of Shifang Pavilion of the Rebel Alliance were coming to attack the Domain Chief's mansion. Even though there were only 1,000 disciples in Shifang Pavilion, they were led by the Pavilion Master, Deputy Pavilion Master, Elders, Deacons, and other God King experts. The 2,000 guards who stayed in the Domain Chief's mansion were almost all in the Sir God realm. Only a few of them were in the God King realm. The most powerful one among them was just a middle God King in the 5th degree realm. Knowing that Shifang Pavilion was coming to attack the Domain Chief's mansion, the guards and servants who stayed in the Domain Chief's mansion were all anxious and worried. They had no choice but to ask for help from the Master of the Firmament Domain. However, the Domain Chief was ordered to stay in Heaven Capital and could not come out. Naturally, he could not save them. However, the leader of the Firmament territory told the guards a piece of great news. That was: stay calm and don't panic. There were already 3 divine generals leading 6,000 troops on their way to support the Domain Chief's mansion. Upon hearing this news, the guards who had been full of worries and sleepless nights heaved a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Everyone was relieved. They cheered up and stared at the entrance of the Domain Chief's mansion, ready to fight at any time. Anyway, under the protection of the defense array, they only needed to keep the array running and replenish its power. Even if they could only hold on for 1 day, the 6,000 reinforcements would arrive in half a day. Therefore, they didn't have to worry about their safety. Time passed quietly, 1 hour after another. Half a day was about to pass, but there was still no movement at the entrance of the Domain Chief's manor. What about the 1,000 disciples of Shifang Pavilion? Weren't they going to attack the Firmament Domain Chief's mansion? Why hasn't there been any movement yet? Calculating the time, they should have arrived long ago. Before this, the guards were afraid that the Shifang Pavilion would invade. Now that reinforcements were coming, they were full of confidence, but they were afraid that the people of Shifang Pavilion would not come. Another 2 hours passed. There was still no movement at the entrance of the Domain Chief's mansion. The disciples of the Shifang Pavilion still hadn't shown up. More than 2,000 guards were in formation. After waiting for so long, they were a little impatient. However, they didn't dare to activate the grand formation and go outside to check the situation. They could only blindly guess and deduce. Just like that, before the disciples of 10 Directions Pavilion arrived, reinforcements arrived. 3 divine warships sped over from afar with dazzling lights. They arrived at the entrance of the Domain Chief's manor. After the divine warship came to a stop, the 6,000 soldiers flew out from the divine worship and quickly got into formation in the sky. Then, under everyone's gaze, 3 immortal generals and 30 commanders and deputy generals in the king god realm showed up. It was reasonable to say that it didn't take 6,000 soldiers to kill the 1,000 disciples of Shifang Pavilion, let alone 30 king god realm experts. But Empyrean God King had sufficient military strength and numerous experts under his command. The 3 immortal generals, Qi, Lu, and Lu, wanted to win this battle easily, so they brought so many king god realm experts with them. However, when they saw that the entrance of the Firmament Domain Chief's mansion was calm and there was no trace of fighting, they were a little confused. They had the same idea as the guards in the Domain Chief's mansion. The people of Shifang Pavilion should have arrived long ago. Why were they nowhere to be seen? The 3 immortal generals realized that something was wrong. They all frowned and hurried to discuss countermeasures through sound transmission. Soon, the 3 immortal generals came up with an idea. One of the immortal generals stayed at the entrance with 2,000 soldiers. They were responsible for monitoring the situation at the entrance and contacting the guards in the Domain Chief's mansion. The other 2 immortal generals led 2,000 soldiers in 2 directions to search the area within a radius of 200,000 miles. The 3 immortal generals agreed that the people of Shifang Pavilion had arrived long ago. However, they didn't launch an attack immediately out of caution. In this case, the people of Shifang Pavilion must be hiding nearby to observe the situation and then find the right time to attack. In this case, they had to find out the people of Shifang Pavilion and kill them all with their absolute advantage in numbers. Soon, the 6,000 soldiers divided into 3 directions to carry out their respective tasks. 2 immortal generals led the 4,000 soldiers to the east and west respectively. Immortal General Lu led 2,000 soldiers to stay where they were. He was vigilant and alert while trying to contact the guards in the Domain Chief's mansion. Fortunately, Immortal General Lu was careful enough. Before he set out, he had asked the Domain Lord for a token that allowed him to enter the Domain Lord's mansion and several jade slips that could be used to contact the guard commander. He sent out a message jade slip to contact the commander of the guards in the Domain Chief's mansion. He told him his identity and the purpose of his visit. The commander of the guards was very cautious. After some twists and turns, he confirmed Immortal General Lu's identity. Then, he opened the entrance of the Domain Chief's mansion and welcomed Immortal General Lu in. As soon as he entered the Domain Chief's mansion, Immortal General Lu didn't want to waste time. He waved his hand to interrupt the greetings of the guards and asked directly, "Is there any news about the disciples of Shifang Pavilion? Did they launch an attack before we arrived?" The commander of the guards knew the seriousness of the matter. He didn't dare to neglect and answered honestly, "Immortal General, we have been guarding in the Domain Chief's mansion. We haven't been attacked or received any news about the disciples of Shifang Pavilion." Immortal General Lu's face became gloomier. He murmured to himself, as expected, "They haven't shown up or attacked. Next, we'll have to wait for the results of the other 2 immortal generals' investigation. If they can find the disciples of Shifang Pavilion nearby, it'll be fine. If they can't, I'm afraid it'll be troublesome." The commander of the guards didn't understand the meaning of Immortal General Lu's words. When he was about to ask, Immortal General Lu turned to leave and said, "Continue to guard the entrance and exit of the Domain Chief's mansion. Don't make any mistakes." The commander of the guards didn't dare to say more. He could only do as he was told. Immortal General Lu left the Domain Chief's mansion and waited patiently in the sky. After a quarter of an hour, Immortal General Qi and Immortal General Lu returned with the army. After talking with each other, they found out that they had searched more than 200,000 miles around but didn't find any trace of the disciples of Shifang Pavilion. This result made Immortal General Lu's face more serious. He couldn't help but whisper, "It's over. Something big is going to happen." Chapter 4305. None of the 4 battle marshals and 20 divine generals under Empyrean God-King's command were mediocre. They were all outstanding talents. However, the firmament continent had been too peaceful before, so many immortal generals didn't have a chance to show their talents. For example, Immortal General Lu was a powerful and meticulous general. Seeing his reaction, Immortal Generals Qi and Lu were both stunned. They asked, "Lu, it's just the Shifang Pavilion that didn't come. What could happen?" "Lu, we all know you're very meticulous. Can you tell us what's going on?" Divine General Lu didn't hide anything. He frowned and said, "In truth, before we set out, I already felt that this matter was rather strange. Although Kenshin is arrogant and overbearing, he is not stupid. He wouldn't be so arrogant as to make such a stupid mistake." He and the disciples of the 4 forces stayed in the illusionary sun-blessed land and let the Shifang Pavilion attack the most dangerous firmament domain chief mansion alone. "Do you think it's possible?" Immortal General Qi thought for a while and shook his head. "Yes, I think it's weird too." Immortal General Lu was still confused. He asked, "But didn't our scouts and informants figure it out?" The disciples of the Shifang Pavilion did come to the firmament domain chief mansion. Immortal General Lu waved his hand and said, "They did come to the domain chief mansion, but it doesn't mean they are going to attack it. Don't forget, the last message we received was yesterday evening." At that time, the disciples of the Shifang Pavilion were still 20 million miles away. The 2 immortal generals were stunned when they heard this. They also felt that there was a big problem. Divine General Lu asked in confusion, "Then tell me, what's going to happen?" Immortal General Lu thought for a while and lowered his voice. He said seriously, "I think it must be Kenshin's conspiracy." The disciples of the Shifang Pavilion didn't come to attack the firmament domain chief mansion. They were just a cover. Besides, I suspect they didn't come to the domain chief mansion and hid somewhere else. We have to report this news to the Celestial King as soon as possible. We can't let our guard down, or something big will happen. Divine Generals Qi and Lu were still a little confused, their faces full of doubt. "Old Lu, we trust your intuition. We also feel that this matter is a little strange. It might be a scheme by the Kenshin. However, we still don't understand why Kenshin would design such a scheme. Using 1,000 disciples of Shifang Pavilion to disperse our forces, so that he could lead the other 4 forces to attack Chengdu. This doesn't seem possible, right?" "Yes. There are only 1,000 disciples in Shifang Pavilion. We can easily annihilate them with 3,000 to 5,000 people. Even if our 6,000 troops left Chengdu still has more than 40,000 troops. Even if he opens the door and allows Kenshin to lead the disciples of the other 4 forces to attack, he is still seeking his own death." Although Divine General Lu's analysis and conjecture made Qi and Lu believe that this was the Kenshin scheme, Qi and Lu believed that it was the Kenshin scheme. However, the 2 of them couldn't figure out the purpose of Kenshin's scheme. Faced with the 2 Divine Generals' doubts, Divine General Lu couldn't explain clearly. He could only say in a low voice, "How can we guess what Kenshin wants to do? Anyway, I trust my intuition. This is definitely the Kenshin scheme. We must report this to the Celestial King." Divine Generals Qi and Lu also knew the seriousness of the matter. They would rather report it incorrectly than hide it. Even if they couldn't guess what Kenshin's scheme was, they believed that Divine King Fengyi and the Celestial King would know how to deal with it. Therefore, the 3 divine generals jointly sent a message jade slip to Divine King Fengyi. Then, Divine King Fengyi reminded the Celestial King. After reporting the situation to their superiors, the 3 divine generals didn't dare to leave without permission. They could only stay at the entrance of the realm of firmament and wait for the Celestial King's orders. About an hour later, Divine King Fengyi sent a message back, conveying the Celestial King's decree. The decree was formal and difficult to understand. However, the general meaning was clear. It was, to order the three divine generals to stay outside the realm of firmament and continue to be vigilant and search for the disciples of Shifang Pavilion. The Celestial King already knew what they reported and would find a way to deal with it. In the future, if they could prove that their warnings were effective, the Celestial King would reward them according to their merits. After receiving this reply, the three divine generals were relieved. They still acted separately, lurking at the entrance of the realm of firmament and continuing to search and wait for the disciples of Shifang Pavilion. In fact, Divine King Fengyi didn't need the three divine generals to remind him. When he learned that the disciples of Shifang Pavilion didn't appear and didn't attack the realm of firmament, he realized that something was wrong. With his intelligence, he naturally guessed that this might be Kenshin's scheme. However, like the three divine generals, he couldn't figure out what Kenshin wanted to do no matter how hard he tried to analyze and figure it out. Therefore, he reported the news to the Celestial King and asked the Celestial King to make the decision. Unfortunately, the Celestial King couldn't figure out the reason or figure out Kenshin's plan and goal after pondering for a long time. In short, he and more than 40,000 soldiers guarded Heaven Capital and closed the entrance. It was as impregnable as a fortress. No matter what tricks Kenshin wanted to play, he would eventually attack Heaven Capital and fight against 40,000 soldiers. He couldn't lose. At this moment, the 1,000 disciples of Shifang Pavilion had already bypassed the realm of firmament and were heading for Heaven Capital. Of course, they didn't come to attack Heaven Capital. Even if the Shifang Pavilion Master led a team of 1,000 elite disciples, attacking the realm of firmament by force was just a stopgap. They were just following Ji Tianqing's order to lurk near Heaven Capital and wait for further orders. As long as they could hide their tracks well and not be discovered by anyone, they would complete the task perfectly. The Shifang Pavilion Master and the elders didn't quite understand why Kenshin gave such an order. But since Kenshin didn't explain, they didn't dare to ask and just did as they were told. On the other hand, after Ji Tianqing sneaked into Heaven Capital, he spent half a day to figure out the layout of defense and the distribution of troops in Heaven Capital. The 44,000 soldiers were composed of dozens of forces and scattered in different locations. Dozens of realm masters and more than 300 King of God realm experts were guarding there. There were also more than 8,000 servants and maids who were settled there. As well as the topography of Heaven Capital, where were the buildings, where were the underground palaces and secret chambers. Ji Tianqing figured it all out. After everything was ready, he didn't waste any time and immediately started to act. At this time, he had already taken over the body of a low-rank god king. This low-rank god king was the deputy of Realm Master Xian, which was the deputy realm master. His status wasn't high, but it wasn't too high. He wouldn't attract too much attention, but he could play a corresponding role. The Apex. Chapter 4306. This unlucky deputy region master was quietly killed by Ji Tianqing while he was still resting in his residence. Ji Tianqing had destroyed his godhead and refined his divine soul's memories, thus obtaining the information he wanted. At the same time, he also knew that tens of thousands of soldiers had almost mutinied a few days ago. This gave him more confidence and more means and opportunities to plunge Tiandu into chaos. This deputy region master followed the Xian and region master to Tiandu with more than 2,000 elite guards. There were 4 other region masters who had a good relationship with them and were secretly in cahoots. Since there were good relationships, there were naturally bad ones. 2 of the region masters had some enmity and grudges with them because of some friction and conflicts. However, everyone stayed in Tiandu, under the eyes of the Celestial King, so they could only pretend to be harmonious and mind their own business. At this moment, a messenger guard came to his residence and reported a piece of news to him. "Sir, those fellows from the pleasure region have taken over our posts and will be replaced now." Not all of the 40,000 soldiers were carrying out their missions. Usually, they were divided into 2 groups and took turns to guard and patrol. This ensured that the soldiers were full of energy and could use their full strength at any time when war broke out. The two groups of soldiers had a deadline of 5 days and had to be replaced every 5 days. In the past few days, more than 2,000 people under the Deputy Region Master had been on duty. They would only be replaced by the people from the Pleasure Region at midnight tonight. It was reasonable to say that the people from the Pleasure Region were a little anxious because they were 8 hours early. However, in the past 2 months, Tiandu had been dull and boring without any disturbances. The guards and soldiers had been impatient to rest all day long. Previously, every time the guards were replaced, the people from the Pleasure Region came a few hours early and the Deputy Region Master did not say anything and the handover went smoothly. In addition, 6,000 soldiers had been deployed in the past 2 days. The Celestial King had begun his counterattack. As long as the soldiers were on duty, they could receive orders to carry out combat-type missions at any time. The people from the Pleasure Region obviously wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to fight for more opportunities to go to war and gain merits. After the messenger guard reported, he thought that the Deputy Region Master would order the soldiers to take over and change the defense like before. However, he did not expect that the Deputy Region Master in front of him had already changed. Ji Tianqing furrowed his brows and scolded angrily, "You bastards from the Joy Realm, did you take my tolerance and kindness as a habit? Do they think that I'm afraid of them? Who didn't know what they were planning? Do you think we're fools? I've already tolerated you so many times, but this time, I definitely won't. Go and tell the people of the Pleasure Domain to scram and not appear before the appointed time." Ah! The messenger guard did not expect the Deputy Region Master to be so angry and say such tough words. Of course, he was a little confused. He hesitated and asked tentatively, "Sir, do I really have to answer them like that?" Ji Tianqing glared at him and scolded, "You coward, are you afraid of them?" The messenger guard shrank back in fright. He didn't dare to speak any more nonsense. He hurriedly bowed and said, "This subordinate understands. Sir, please rest assured that this subordinate will convey your message truthfully." After that, the messenger guard ran away like a wisp of smoke. Ji Tianqing got up and went to the study. He asked the maidservant to make a pot of tea. Then, he leisurely reclined in the armchair and waited for the follow-up. He had already spread out his divine sense to observe the situation around him. He stared at his subordinates and the people of the Joy Realm. He could clearly tell that when the messenger guard relayed his words to the people of the Happy Realm, the expressions on their faces had been marvelous. What happened next was also within his expectations. The Vice Domain Master of Joy Realm and his many guards were naturally enraged by the humiliation and started a conflict with the soldiers under his command. Both sides cursed and ridiculed each other. No one was willing to back down, so shoving and fighting broke out. Although no one was killed, dozens of people from both sides were injured. Most of them were lightly injured, but a few people were seriously injured. It was very miserable. Of course, the matter was blown out of proportion. The Deputy Region Master of the Joy Realm hurriedly called for their Region Master to calm the situation. The messenger guard ran to Ji Tianqing and reported what had happened. Ji Tianqing was furious when he heard this. He angrily reprimanded the people of the Joy Realm for being presumptuous and lawless. His subordinates were still on duty, but the other party dared to attack them. They had gone too far. He immediately asked the messenger guard to report to the Region Master of the Xian and region. He also contacted a few Region Masters who were on good terms with him to support them. After a while, the Region Master of the Xian and region ran to Ji Tianqing and angrily asked him what had happened. Ji Tianqing's anger hadn't subsided yet, so he described the actions of those people from the realm of happiness to Nye Tian with exaggerated details. Although the Region Master of the Xian and region felt that something was wrong, he didn't think too much about it because they had a common enemy. When he learned that Ji Tianqing had contacted a few other region masters to support them and reason with the other party, the region master of the Xian and region agreed wholeheartedly. Moreover, he advised earnestly, "We are going to launch our counterattack soon. Now is a crucial moment. We must not cause any trouble. I know that you are regretful and angry that the three divine generals did not choose us when they led their troops to battle. However, you did not show any emotion and could still remain calm. Let the other four region masters be the judge. Then, I can rest assured." Ji Tianqing quickly said, "That's right. We are an elite army. We have sacrificed our lives for the Celestial King. How loyal are we to the Celestial King? How can we let those bastards from the Joy Realm bully us? This is absolutely intolerable. However, I will not have a conflict with them. I will only let the other region masters be the judge. If we can't explain it clearly, we will ask Divine King Fengyi to be the judge." The region master of the Xian and region quickly waved his hand and persuaded, "Don't. It's best if we can settle this privately. Don't disturb Divine King Fengyi." Ji Tianqing nodded to show that he understood. The region master of the Xian and region was still a little worried. He decided to go to the scene personally. Ji Tianqing followed him. However, a mocking sneer flashed across his eyes. The two of them left the courtyard they lived in. They had only flown 1,000 miles when the messenger guard rushed towards them with a flustered look on his face. The region master of the Xian and region's heart skipped a beat. He had a premonition that the situation was not good. He quickly stopped the guard and asked, "Why are you so flustered?" With a sullen face, the messenger guard replied with an embarrassed expression, "Domain Lord, the other four domain lords have brought their men here to judge and uphold justice for us, but we didn't expect the bastards from the Joy Domain to be so unforgiving. They slandered us and insisted that we bullied them with numbers." The other commanders were furious and started fighting with them again. The four domain lords were also affected, and everyone was swept up in it. So, the five of us joined forces and defeated all the people from the Joy Realm. Chapter 4307. Xian and Region Lord was afraid that things would get out of hand. When he heard this news, his vision went black and he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Ji Tianqing was not surprised by this because this was part of his prediction and plan to begin with. Both sides had just fought a battle and were still angry and impulsive. At this time, they called for the help of the four region lords. Even if they wanted to reason with them, the region lord would think that they were bullying them with numbers. Therefore, there was nothing for both sides to talk about. It was inevitable that there would be a conflict. When their own guards were beaten up, the four region lords who were on good terms with them could not just stand by and watch. They would definitely intervene and stop the fight. Since they had intervened, they would definitely be involved. Once the situation became chaotic and both sides were filled with anger, a chaotic battle was unavoidable. However, Ji Tianqing was more concerned about, defeated all of them? Did he injure them? Or killed them? This was a crucial question that determined the severity of the problem. The messenger guard's face turned even uglier. He was so anxious that he was about to cry. 90% of the people from the region lord were seriously injured by us. More than 200 people were killed in the chaotic battle. Xian and region lord, who had just regained his senses, heard this news again. His vision turned black again, and he really spat out a mouthful of old blood. "Pfft, we're finished. Lives have been lost. There's no way to clean up this mess." Ji Tianqing sneered in his heart. On the surface, he had to comfort Xian and region lord. He said confidently, "Don't worry, region lord. It was the people from the region lord's fault. They were the ones who were unreasonable. The four region lords can testify for us. Don't worry, God King Fengyi will definitely clear our names." Xian and region lord was so angry that he could not speak. At this point, the news could not be hidden anymore. God King Fengyi would probably receive the news soon and go to deal with this matter. Therefore, Xian and Region Lord sped up and rushed to the scene of the incident. When he arrived at the scene with Ji Tianqing, he realized that there were new changes to the situation. The scene of the incident was originally on a mountain peak surrounded by forests. However, the previous battle had flattened the mountain and the 20,000 miles of forest had turned into ruins. More than 2,000 guards from the Joy Realm were lying on the ground in disarray. The guards were all covered in blood and in a sorry state. They kept howling in pain. There were over 1,000 people who were trying their best to endure their injuries and treat their companions who were even more severely injured. Most of Ji Tianqing's 2,000 guards were safe and sound. Only a few of them were injured. As for the 4 area masters, they had only brought 200 to 300 guards with them. In total, there were only about 1,000 people, and there were not many casualties. Logically speaking, since the people of the pleasure domain had been taught a lesson and ended up in such a miserable state, they should have been obedient. However, both the domain master and the deputy domain master were injured. They were so angry that they almost went berserk. How could they swallow their anger? When Ji Tianqing and Xian and Territorial Lord arrived, Shui Lu and the Deputy Territorial Lord saw them and could not hold back their anger. No matter how good-tempered Xian and Region Master was, he still frowned after being scolded. His face was as dark as the bottom of a pot. However, he tried his best to restrain his anger and did not explode. Ji Tianqing, on the other hand, was filled with righteous indignation. He fiercely retaliated and scolded the other party. Of course, the people of the pleasure domain were not in the right. They could not fight back after being scolded. However, his words, "You deserve to be beaten. A bunch of lawless bastards. It's best if you die," made the people of the pleasure domain go crazy. Obviously, this sentence was like adding fuel to the fire. It intensified the conflict between the two sides and made them hate each other to the max. The Shui Lu and the Deputy Territorial Lord were so angry that they vomited blood. They glared at Ji Tianqing and Xian and Region Master with bloodshot eyes and said something like, "We will never give up," and "We will never live under the same sky." At this moment, another 5 territorial lords, each with a few hundred guards, arrived above the ruins. The 5 domain lords were all called over by Domain Lord Qialu to help uphold justice. They had a very good relationship with him and were very close friends. More importantly, 2 of the territorial lords had a feud with Xian and Region Master. There had always been conflicts between them. Seeing that the 5 territorial lords had brought more than 3,000 guards, Shui Lu felt more confident with helpers. He recounted what had happened. Naturally, he cut the beginning and the end of the story and exaggerated the details. He described the guards of the Joy Domain as innocent, and Ji Tianqing's side as guilty of the most heinous crimes. Moreover, the more than 2,000 people of the Pleasure Domain were in such a miserable state. More than 200 of them had died. The 5 territorial lords believed his story without a doubt. They angrily condemned Xian and Region Master, Ji Tianqing, and the others. Just like this, the two sides were divided into 2 factions. They attacked, slandered, and cursed each other. The situation became tense again. Both sides had the same number of people. They both felt that they were in the right and that the other side was guilty of the most heinous crimes. Therefore, no one was willing to back down. Even if some of the territorial lords came to help, they could still maintain their rationality. They advised everyone not to be too agitated and not to make a big deal out of it. However, Ji Tianqing was at the scene. He could make the people of the pleasure domain go crazy with just a few words. If it really didn't work, he could take advantage of the time when both sides were pushing and blaming each other to secretly kill a few of the guards of the other side. Just like this, the conflict between the two sides intensified again. No one could persuade or stop them. They started fighting again in the ruins. There were more than 3,000 people on both sides. Moreover, they were fighting with real weapons. The power was terrifying. When the chaos reached its peak, even the 10 territorial lords from both sides made a move. They were divided into 2 factions and fought fiercely. In just a few minutes, the ruins had expanded to 50,000 miles. Shouts of killing shook the sky. Both sides also suffered a large number of casualties. At this crucial moment, someone in the crowd suddenly shouted, "Divine King Feng Yi is here." Hearing the shout of a certain territorial lord, the battle paused for a moment. Thousands of people from both sides turned to look. As expected, in the sky 20,000 miles away, Divine King Feng Yi was rushing over angrily with 3,000 silver-armored forbidden guards. Once they saw Divine King Feng Yi in the silver-armored forbidden guards, many soldiers were terrified. They didn't dare to fight anymore. However, how could Ji Tianqing let the battle stop? Taking advantage of this opportunity, he struck again and killed more than 10 guards in an instant. He even chopped off the arms of a deputy region master. The people of the pleasure domain reacted. They were unable to restrain their anger. They cursed words like treacherous and despicable. They then started to attack the people of the Xian and region. Even when Divine King Feng Yi brought the silver-armored forbidden guards to the battlefield and surrounded both sides didn't have any intention to stop. Seeing this, Divine King Feng Yi became even more furious. He shouted with a dignified voice to stop. Unexpectedly, Ji Tianqing hid in the chaotic crowd and used some methods. He caused countless sharp blades of divine light to shoot towards the silver-armored forbidden guards. Especially the people of the pleasure domain. They released their divine arts and secret arts. They strangely changed directions and smashed towards the forbidden guards. Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 4308. The battlefield was chaotic to begin with, so it was not surprising for anything to happen. Even if someone attacked the silver-armored Imperial Guards, everyone would be shocked, but they would not be surprised. As for the Imperial Guards, they were naturally filled with anger and killing intent as they fought back. They had been guarding the divine capital for many years and were the Imperial Guards under the Celestial King. How noble was their status? To put it simply, they were the direct subordinates of the Celestial King. As for the thousands of soldiers in front of them, they were merely the subordinates of the various vassals. Facing the territorial lords, the Imperial Guards were very reserved and proud. As for the soldiers from the various territories, they were even more superior and did not look them in the eye. Therefore, the silver-armored Imperial Guards were enraged. They mercilessly waved their weapons and used all sorts of divine abilities to kill those who had mistakenly injured them. Under the deliberate control of Ji Tianqing, the attacks released by the silver-armored Imperial Guards were scattered in the crowd and indiscriminately attacked many people. No matter if it was the soldiers from Xian and region or Qialo region, they were all mercilessly attacked. Although the silver-armored Imperial Guards did not feel any guilt, in their eyes, these soldiers were all rebels and traitors. But to the thousands of soldiers, the silver-armored Imperial Guards were indiscriminately killing people. It was truly abominable. As the chaos became more and more intense, more silver-armored Imperial Guards attacked and killed those soldiers who dared to resist. The soldiers did not differentiate between friend and foe. At this moment, they actually put down the conflict between the two territories and joined forces to resist the silver-armored Imperial Guards. Seeing this scene, God King Feng Yi almost exploded in anger. He originally brought the silver-armored Imperial Guards to calm the chaos, but before he could even speak, the silver-armored Imperial Guards were dragged into the battle and it became a three-sided chaotic battle. What the F***ck was this? There were casualties on all three sides. Even more than 100 silver-armored Imperial Guards were mistakenly killed. God King Feng Yi knew that if he did not use forceful means to calm the chaos, he would be held accountable. Territorial Lord Xian and Territorial Lord Xiaolu, and all of you, Divine King Feng Yi cast a sealing divine formation to seal off the area within 30,000 miles, forcefully suppressing the thousands of soldiers while calling out the names of the domain lords. Those few domain lords were called out and naturally, they didn't dare to fight as they stared intently at God King Feng Yi. God King Feng Yi's heart was filled with anger as he angrily ordered, "No matter what the reason is that caused you to fight, I order you all to immediately stop your subordinates. If you refuse to come to your senses, then don't blame me for being impolite and annihilating all of you." Seeing that God King Feng Yi was truly enraged, killing intent flashed in his eyes. Those domain lords who came to help and support the situation immediately cowered. "Yes, sir. Don't worry, my lord. I will give the order now." Several domain lords gave orders for their soldiers to stop fighting and retreat to the edge of the battlefield. However, Domain Master Xuelu was the one who suffered the most. Not only were more than 2,000 of his guards crippled, but he was also ambushed by Ji Tianqing. He was severely injured and even lost both of his legs. He was so enraged that he was on the verge of going berserk. His mind wasn't clear anymore. "God King Feng Yi, I can listen to your orders, but, you have to ask the bastards of Xian and region to stop first." Hearing this, Xian and region lord was unhappy. He cursed angrily, "Domain Master Xuelu, who are you scolding? Did I not teach you enough of a lesson? Do you want me to annihilate all of your men before you will be obedient?" Ji Tianqing added fuel to the fire and added, "Domain Master Xuelu has gone mad. He is now a mad dog that will bite anyone he sees. Everyone, be careful." His voice was neither loud nor soft, but it was heard clearly by many divine kings. Domain Master Xuelu already hated Ji Tianqing to the core. He was instantly enraged. He didn't care about God King Feng Yi's presence. His eyes were bloodshot as he roared and charged towards Ji Tianqing with his divine blade. Even though Ji Tianqing could kill Domain Master Xuelu with a casual move. On the surface, Domain Master Xuelu was a 6th Heaven Realm Intermediate Divine King, while he was only a 3rd Heaven Realm Lower Divine King. Therefore, he had to show his fear. He retreated and ran away in a panic. Coincidentally, in his panic, he lost his composure and ran towards a group of silver-armored Imperial Guards. Bam bam bam. Domain Master Xuelu used all his strength to perform his ultimate skill and hit more than 200 Imperial Guards. Those unlucky fellows were injured on the spot. More than 40 of them were killed. How arrogant were the silver-armored Imperial Guards? They were usually arrogant. Now that they were injured one after another, how could they take it lying down? There was no need for God King Feng Yi to give the order. The silver-armored Imperial Guards joined forces to perform their skills and besiege Domain Master Xuelu. Looking at their stance, they would only stop when they killed Domain Master Xuelu on the spot. Since Domain Master Xueli's life was in danger, how could the deputy Domain Masters and more than 1,000 soldiers ignore it? They were originally Domain Master Xueli's retainers. They were not under the control of the Imperial Guards and God King Feng Yi. If they were asked who they were most loyal to, it would undoubtedly be Domain Master Xuelu. Just like this, the chaos that had been suppressed with much difficulty erupted again. Domain Master Xuelu and the Imperial Guards started fighting. Blood splattered everywhere and miserable cries were heard. However, the people from the other domains had learned their lesson. They retreated silently and did not dare to interfere. Especially the people from Xian and region. They were all gloating. God King Feng Yi also had a headache. He hated Domain Master Xuelu, Domain Master Xian and Ji Tianqing to the core. Especially Ji Tianqing. God King Feng Yi was meticulous. Naturally, he could guess that Ji Tianqing seemed to be running away in a panic, but he was actually trying to divert the trouble. To put it simply, this fellow purposely provoked Domain Master Xue Lu and made him attack the silver-armored Imperial Guards. If it was during normal times, God King Feng Yi would not be disgusted by the Domain Masters under his command. It would not be a problem if it was used on the enemy. However, it was used on the Imperial Guards and in his hands. He had his eyes on Ji Tianqing. No matter what, he would not forgive Ji Tianqing. As for the 2,000 Imperial Guards working together to kill the people from Domain Master Xue Lu, God King Feng Yi saw that what was done could not be undone. He did not say anything to stop it. He was a decisive and ruthless person. He knew that Domain Master Xue Lu and Xian and region were the source of the chaos. If he did not eliminate one of them, it would be hard to calm the chaos. Since Domain Master Xue Lu was more reckless and crazy, then he would eliminate the people from Domain Master Xue Lu. It was their bad luck. The facts proved that God King Feng Yi's method was very effective. The Imperial Guards had the advantage in numbers and their average strength was higher than the people from Domain Master Xue Lu. Furthermore, God King Feng Yi had personally taken action. In a short 15 minutes, the people from Domain Master Xue Lu were all killed. Only the Deputy Domain Master survived and was captured by God King Feng Yi. Even Domain Master Xue Lu was killed by God King Feng Yi because he was too crazy and had lost his mind. Peak. Chapter 4309. There was only one person left from Joy Region. And this Deputy Region Lord was the one who had experienced the entire incident. From the beginning of the conflict, he had been present, so God King Feng Yi had spared his life. Everyone, tie yourselves up and be escorted by the Imperial Guards to Capital God Palace to await your punishment. Apparently, God King Feng Yi had quelled the chaos and wanted to escort everyone to be interrogated. The various region lords and soldiers looked at each other in dismay and hesitated for a while, but none of them were willing to bind themselves. Of the 3,000 Imperial Guards, only 2,500 remained, and most of them were injured. These Imperial Guards had learned to be smart and no longer forcefully captured everyone. Instead, they looked on coldly with imposing manner. God King Feng Yi flew into a rage again and used his ninth heaven realm God King's imposing manner to intimidate the various region lords. Therefore, those region lords could only submit obediently. The various region soldiers all tied themselves up and obediently lined up before being escorted out of the ruins by the Imperial Guards. A group of thousands of people flew across the sky and headed straight for Capital God Palace, which was 100,000 miles away. This scene was naturally seen by many region lords and soldiers. Of course, dozens of region lords and tens of thousands of soldiers had already received the news and knew about the conflict and killing between Xian and region and Joy region. When they saw the prisoners being escorted and discovered that only Joy region's deputy region lord was among them and there were no other Joy region soldiers, many of them smelled the scent of danger. Especially those region lords who were more astute, they immediately guessed that Joy region's people were all killed. It's just a conflict between the two regions' soldiers and a chaotic brawl. Joy region's people were all killed. Heavens! Things have become so serious. Joy region's 2,000 over people, were they killed by Xian and region's people or were they killed by God King Feng Yi? Looks like this matter has gotten out of hand. I wonder how Celestial King will deal with them. God King Empyrean, God King Feng Yi, and those arrogant Imperial Guards don't care about our lives at all. Our territories and caves were invaded but they were indifferent. Now that there's a brawl between the two regions, God King Feng Yi actually killed all the soldiers in one region. What vicious means? Stop guessing. Since you know that they don't care about our lives, then keep your mouths shut. Everyone, be careful. Don't make any mistakes at this critical juncture. For a time, many domain lords and soldiers were discussing this matter in private. The massacre of the Joy Domain's people made the soldiers of many other domains fall silent out of fear. They felt like the fox mourning the death of the hare. Today, God King Feng Yi could casually kill everyone in Joy region. Tomorrow, if they committed any mistakes, God King Feng Yi could also kill them all. How could they not be afraid? Not long after, several thousand criminals were escorted out of the Heavenly God Palace. Capital Heaven Divine Palace, which occupied an area of 10,000 feet, stood at the peak of a huge mountain. It was very majestic and had a majestic aura. Even though the Celestial King, who had already received the news, was sitting in the council hall, full of anger, waiting for the trial of the sinners who had made mistakes. However, God King Feng Yi had captured thousands of people and it was impossible for all of them to enter the main hall. Therefore, the soldiers of the various domains stayed in the plaza outside the Heavenly God Palace and silently waited for their punishment. All the domain lords, deputy domain lords, and commanders followed God King Feng Yi into the council hall. There were more than 40 people and they stood in 2 rows in the hall. The God King experts on the left row were from the 5 factions led by the Xian and Domain Lord. The God King experts on the right row were from the 4 domain lords who supported the Joy region. Even when they were in the council hall, standing under the eyes of the Celestial King, both parties were glaring at each other with deep enmity. This scene made the Celestial King extremely angry. His face and eyes turned gloomy. God King Feng Yi, why don't you tell me what happened? After everyone bowed and paid their respects, the Celestial King lifted his wide sleeves and asked in a dignified tone. God King Feng Yi quickly stood in the middle of the hall and briefly explained the cause and process of the incident. He was considered fair and impartial. His position and attitude were impartial as he explained the situation truthfully. After hearing this, the Celestial King already had a plan in mind and asked for the details. There were many questions regarding the details. God King Feng Yi was not an eyewitness and naturally could not answer. Therefore, the Deputy Domain Lord of the Joy region, Ji Tianqing, and many other commanders all needed to answer. As for the Deputy Domain Lord of the Joy region, he was naturally furious. He hated the people of the Xian and region to the core and described them as heinous beyond redemption. Ji Tianqing and the commanders of the Xian and region were no exception. They pushed all the blame to the Joy region. Both parties started arguing in the hall and attacked each other. Ji Tianqing's side had the advantage in numbers. The Deputy Domain Lord of the Joy region was alone and was quickly defeated. He was so angry that he could only vomit blood. Seeing the noisy and foul atmosphere in the hall, the Celestial King slammed the table angrily. After everyone quieted down, he announced the results of the trial. There was no doubt that it was the usual method used by the superiors. Both sides will be punished 50 times. The Joy region made the mistake first and should be punished severely. However, the Joy region lord and his subordinates were all killed. They had already paid a terrible price, so they did not pursue the matter further. The Deputy Domain Lord of the Joy region was pardoned and ordered to return to his residence to recuperate. He was also grounded for 10 years. As for the Xian and region, from the Domain Lord to the Deputy Domain Lord, and more than 2,000 soldiers under his command, they were all severely punished. The Xian and region soldiers were punished with 200 Thunder God's whips, regardless of casualties. The Domain Lord and Deputy Domain Lord did not supervise well and were punished with 200 Thunder God's whips. They were also punished with 300 Thunder God's whips in the Heaven Punishment Sword formation. In addition, all the Domain Lords and soldiers who helped support and participated in this chaotic battle were also severely punished. To put it simply, the Celestial King wanted to make an example of them to intimidate the people of the other regions. After the series of sentences were announced, there was an uproar among the Domain Lords in the hall. The Deputy Domain Lord of the Joy region was relieved and secretly rejoiced in others' misfortune. As for the Xian and region Lord, Ji Tianqing, and the others, their reactions were very intense and resistant. First of all, more than 2,000 people from the Xian and region were seriously injured. The Divine Lord Realm soldiers were already seriously injured. After receiving 200 Thunder God's whips, they would be crippled even if they did not die. As for the Xian and Region Lord and Ji Tianqing, they received 200 Thunder God's whips and 300 Thunder God's whips. Of course, they would not die, but they would be crippled. The other domain lords and soldiers would also be severely injured after receiving the punishment. It would be difficult for them to recover within 10 years. In this way, in the following battle with the Kenshin and the Rebel Alliance, these people would not have the chance to fight and contribute. How could they be willing to accept the punishment? All the domain lords were in an uproar. They begged for mercy and asked the Celestial King to reduce the punishment. Ji Tianqing argued emotionally but was sternly reprimanded by the Celestial King. Therefore, he rushed out of the hall in a fit of anger, ran to the square, and committed suicide in front of everyone. The Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 43:10. When Ji Tianqing rushed out of the main hall and flew into the sky above the square, everyone was stunned. Celestial King, Feng Yi, and the other zone leaders in the main hall were all stunned. No one had expected that a mere deputy zone leader would be so audacious as to defy the Celestial King's decision to punish him. Moreover, the Joy region had already paid a terrible price. Other than the deputy zone leader, the entire army had been wiped out. As one of the main culprits, it was reasonable for the Xian and region to receive such a punishment from the Celestial King. What was so unacceptable about it? As for the thousands of soldiers in the square, they were all stunned on the spot. They all stayed in the square, anxiously waiting for the results of the trial. Unexpectedly, before the Celestial King's trial was over, they saw the Xian and deputy zone leader fly out and commit suicide in the sky in front of everyone. Most importantly, before the Xian and deputy zone leader committed suicide, his face was full of anger. His tone was very sullen and he unwillingly shouted a few words. "We have been wronged." The Celestial King did not distinguish between right and wrong. He did not care about the lives of our soldiers. He did not treat us as human beings at all. He asked Feng Yi to kill everyone in the Joy region, and now he wants to kill all the soldiers in the Xian and region. I will not accept this. I would rather die than accept this. After shouting these words, Ji Tianqing raised his hand and slammed it on the top of his head in front of everyone. Almost everyone heard a crisp, crack sound. Then, he bled from his 7 orifices and died on the spot. His intact body fell from the sky and landed on the square with a plop, causing countless soldiers to retreat to avoid it. Then, the square fell into silence. Everyone was stunned and dumbfounded. The words that Ji Tianqing shouted before he committed suicide still reverberated between heaven and earth. Not only did the experts in the heavenly palace and the soldiers in the square hear it, even the other zone leaders and soldiers within a radius of 10,000 miles heard it clearly. For a moment, everyone was deeply shocked. They could not believe this result. What shocked everyone was that Xian and deputy region leader was so bold as to challenge the Celestial King. However, when everyone thought about it, if the Xian and deputy region lord was not even afraid of death, what else was there to be afraid of? As they understood this, countless soldiers couldn't help but have the same thought. How ruthless was the Celestial King that he had forced Deputy Region Master Xian and into a dead end. Also, the words that Xian and Deputy Region Lord had shouted before he committed suicide were also full of anger and unwillingness. Those who heard them trembled and felt stifled. Almost all of the soldiers could feel the grievance and anger of Deputy Region Master Xian and they could empathize with him. After a moment of silence, the thousands of soldiers in the square burst into a torrent of exclamations and discussions. The domain lords and soldiers of the surrounding domains also began to discuss this matter and spread the news. Celestial King Feng Yi, and the others were stunned for a moment before they calmed down. Many of the domain lords and deputy region masters looked embarrassed. Their expressions were complicated. Regardless of their relationship with the Xian and Deputy Region Master, after witnessing with their own eyes how unyielding the Xian and Deputy Region Master was and how he would rather commit suicide than compromise, everyone felt respect for him. At the same time, like Xian and Deputy Region Leader, they were also dissatisfied with the Celestial King. Especially the words that Xian and Deputy Region Leader had said before he died, they were deeply impressed. Everyone understood that without the lips, the teeth would feel cold. Today, the entire Sheila region had been killed, and Xian and Deputy Region Leader had been forced to commit suicide. If no one stood up to resist, and the Celestial King continued to do as he pleased, the next ones to be killed would be them. Thinking of this, many of the domain lords and Deputy Region Masters felt even more resentment and hatred for the Celestial King. Celestial King Fengyi's expression was very ugly. He knew very well that Xian and Deputy Region Leader had used his death to show his sincerity. By committing suicide in public, it would cause a huge commotion and bring about negative effects. Although, in his opinion, the punishment that the Celestial King had given to the soldiers of Xian and region was not too excessive, it could only be called severe. However, Xian and Deputy Region Leader had committed suicide in public and shouted a slogan of resistance before he died. This would change the mood of the matter. When the tens of thousands of soldiers heard the news, they would definitely sympathize with the weak and their own kind. They would all think that the Celestial King was too cruel and did not care about their lives. If the tens of thousands of soldiers were disloyal and held a grudge against the Celestial King, then this war would be lost without a fight. Thinking of this, Celestial King Fengyi was filled with regret. He only regretted that he had not acted in time to stop Xian and Deputy Region Leader from committing suicide. However, no one had expected Xian and Deputy Region Leader to be so bold and unyielding. No one had expected such a thing to happen. Not only him, even the Celestial King was stunned and could not react. Sigh, at this point, Celestial King Fengyi also felt a headache. There was no way to solve this problem. He could only sigh silently. As for the Celestial King, he was still sitting high on the throne. He stared at the square outside the palace with a gloomy expression. He definitely would not have the slightest bit of regret, let alone feel guilty. At this moment, there was only anger in his heart. Xian and Deputy Region Leader was so bold and did not care about him at all. This proved that he had no authority in the hearts of the other region leaders and generals. The loyalty and respect that the other region leaders had for him was pitifully low. How could he not be angry? As the saying goes, if the king wants his subject to die, the subject must die. You region leaders and deputy region leaders were all appointed by me. This prince appreciates and thinks highly of you, giving you noble statuses and great power. In the end, not only did you not respect and be loyal to me, you even dared to go against me. You would rather die than slander and frame me. After such a thing happened, how would the other region leaders view me? How would the tens of thousands of soldiers criticize me? How despicable! Even though Xian and Deputy Region Leader had already committed suicide, the Celestial King was still furious. He still wanted to cut him into pieces and grind his bones to dust to vent his anger. However, although the Celestial King was angry, he did not lose his mind. He knew very well that if he really gave the order to grind Xian and Deputy Region Leader's bones to dust, the tens of thousands of soldiers would be even more disappointed and completely give up on him. That would only make things worse. After calming down and considering, the Celestial King said in a low voice, "The punishment that I announced was completely in accordance with the laws set by the God Emperor. It is absolutely reasonable." Xian and Deputy Region Leader had rebellious thoughts and lost his mind to do such a thing. I am extremely disappointed. In addition, this person's usual nature is not like this. Now that he is so extreme, it is most likely that he was instigated and provoked by someone. Celestial King Fengyi, I order you to investigate this matter and find out who instigated and misled the soldiers. Hearing this, Celestial King Fengyi heaved a sigh of relief. Knowing that the Celestial King had restrained his anger and made the safest and most appropriate decision, he was deeply gratified. Therefore, he quickly bowed and said, "Rest assured, my lord, I will definitely investigate and find out the real reason. I will definitely not let the soldiers be misled and instigated." Chapter 43:11. The Celestial King's words were directed at the various zone lords. Later, he would announce it to the entire Tiandu so that tens of thousands of soldiers would know. Therefore, his words were concise and clear, indicating his attitude. But Divine King Fengyi was very clear that there were unspoken words. First, no matter how the Celestial King punished the soldiers, it represented the will of the Nebula God Emperor. The soldiers had no right to criticize or resist. Second, the Xian and Deputy Region Lord's behavior was a little abnormal, not in line with his usual behavior. Divine King Fengyi had to investigate. He had to find out if the Xian and Deputy Region Lord was instigated by someone or if there were other reasons. Third, no matter what the soldiers thought, even if they were filled with righteous indignation, had a common enemy, and hated the Celestial King. This matter had to be determined as the soldiers were misled and instigated. Divine King Fengyi only needed to find some scapegoats, put the crime of instigation on them, and get rid of them. In short, the Celestial King really did not care about the lives of the soldiers. It was not a big deal if 1 or 1,000 died. He only needed the soldiers to loyally obey his orders. If Divine King Fengyi could guess the Celestial King's unspoken words, he naturally had the ability to complete these tasks. Therefore, the Celestial King withdrew from the main hall and left leisurely. Divine King Fengyi stayed behind to supervise the various zone lords and soldiers as they went to the torture chamber to receive their punishment. The 10 zone lords had mixed feelings, especially the Xian and Deputy Region Lord, who was suffering in his heart. The thousands of soldiers who participated in the battle were also silent along the way. If it was in the past, when they were being punished in the torture chamber, they would definitely be screaming in pain. But what was strange was that this time, whether it was the zone lords or the soldiers, they were all silently receiving their punishment and were carried away by their comrades. Of course, there were also many soldiers who were already seriously injured who could not withstand the torture and fainted on the spot or had their divine bodies destroyed. However, they still didn't cry out or beg for mercy. They only swept their gazes with incomparable hatred and resentment at the people in the torture hall who were carrying out the punishment. Silent hatred was the scariest. Silence did not represent fear. These domain masters and soldiers who had been tortured were only temporarily swallowing their anger. However, in their hearts, they had given up on Celestial King and Celestial King Fengyi. The so-called loyalty had also vanished into thin air. Of course, they were still in Tiandu and could not betray the Celestial King. But if they were allowed to leave Tiandu, that might not be the case. After the thousands of soldiers received their punishment, nearly half of them fell into a coma. A few of them had their divine bodies crippled, and dozens of them died on the spot. Those who could still move returned to their residences to recuperate. Those who could not move were dragged and carried by the silver-armored imperial guards. They were like goods being transported back to their station. This scene was witnessed by many territorial lords and soldiers of various regions. Seeing the tragic fate of the punished soldiers, then looking at the murderous aura of the silver-armored imperial guards, and their cold and merciless attitude, the imperial guards had a cold and merciless attitude. Even if those territorial lords and soldiers were not implicated, they also felt a sense of sympathy. As the relevant news spread throughout Tiandu, more than 40,000 soldiers understood the cause and effect of the matter, as well as the methods of Celestial King and Celestial King Fengyi. For a time, the entire Tiandu was filled with a heavy and oppressive atmosphere. Tens of thousands of soldiers discussed in private, but on the surface they were very silent. Especially when facing Celestial King and his soldiers, they were extremely depressed. In short, the soldiers and the people under Celestial King had formed a very deep estrangement. Although the two sides would not oppose each other for the time being, the gap between the classes was rapidly solidifying. No matter how many methods Celestial King and Celestial King Fengyi used, they could not eliminate it. However, both sides stood on their own standpoints and did not think they were in the wrong. No one would reflect or give in. The suicide of Xian and Deputy Domain Master was, of course, a show put on by Ji Tianqing. He sneaked into Tiandu and possessed Xian and Deputy Domain Master to create conflict and disrupt the situation in Tiandu. When Celestial King Fengyi killed everyone in the pleasure region and captured everyone to be interrogated, his goal had been achieved. Xian and Deputy Domain Master's identity did not have much value. In addition, Celestial King Fengyi had already noticed him and would definitely closely monitor and investigate him. Since that was the case, he might as well add one last flame when the matter had reached its peak and was about to end and calm down. He committed suicide in front of everyone, and before he died, he cried out for justice and accused Celestial King and Celestial King Fengyi of their crimes. This resonated with many territorial lords and soldiers. It had to be said that this move was ruthless and the effect was very obvious. Moreover, at that time, no one thought that he would do that. No one reacted, and no one could stop him. The so-called suicide was actually relatively simple. When he smashed the top of his head with his palm and made a suicidal move, his soul quietly left his body and flew away. As for Xian and Deputy Domain Master's divinity fragment, he kept it and returned it to the head of the corpse. In this way, his soul successfully left the body, and Xian and Deputy Domain Master's death was very real and natural. Even if Celestial King and Celestial King Fengyi were suspicious, they could not find anything wrong with Xian and Deputy Domain Master's body after the incident. After Ji Tianqing's soul left the square in front of the palace, he temporarily returned to his body and continued to hide in Tiandu to find his next target. As for who the next target would be, that would depend on how the situation developed, and then the most suitable target would be chosen. For the next few days, the atmosphere in Tiandu was very strange. A few tens of region lords and their subordinates were still discussing endlessly in secret, and their moods were extremely dejected and annoyed. Although they did not show any intention to resist, they still followed Celestial King and Celestial King Fengyi's orders and continued to carry out their mission. However, every time they saw Celestial King's soldiers, as well as the silver-armored Imperial Guards, they would be especially cold and indifferent, and there would be a complicated look in their eyes. Even when Celestial King Fengyi was investigating the death of Xian and Deputy Domain Master, he noticed this situation and realized that there was a gap between the two sides, and there might be signs of danger. However, the dozens of territorial lords and tens of thousands of soldiers were well behaved and did not make a single mistake, and he could not do anything to change it. After the incident, he even reminded Celestial King, but Celestial King did not take it to heart, and said coldly, Xian and Deputy Domain Master's suicide incident has caused the soldiers to misunderstand me, and their reaction is normal. You don't have to pay attention to them, they will be fine after a while. Moreover, they are my people and soldiers, so they should obey any orders I give them. Don't tell me that I have to consider their emotions and feelings, and counsel them. Celestial King Fengyi had nothing to say, and could only give up. Even if he was still worried, he could only comfort himself like this. When the Kenshin and the Rebel Alliance's army arrived, and both sides fought, the attention of the territorial lords and soldiers would be diverted, and they would not worry about this matter anymore. Chapter 43:12. Heaven Capital was peaceful again. Even the situation in the firmament land quieted down, without any ripples. Divine Generals Qi, Lu, and Lu were still guarding the entrance of the Firmament Domain Chief's mansion with their 6,000 soldiers. They were hiding in the dark, monitoring the movements within a radius of 200,000 miles, waiting for the disciples of the Shifang Pavilion to show up. The 1,000 disciples of the Shifeng Pavilion were also hiding 200,000 miles away from the entrance of Heaven Capital, waiting for Ji Tianqing's order. Neither side noticed the other. They were waiting for the other to make the first move. The situation was in a stalemate. They couldn't find a breakthrough. The 99 regions of the firmament land were also in a state of peace. Countless people were talking about the situation, feeling anxious for the celestial king in Kenshin. Didn't the disciples of the Shifeng Pavilion attack the firmament domain chief's mansion? Why didn't they do anything? Moreover, the disciples of the Shifeng Pavilion seemed to have evaporated. They were nowhere to be found. Why were the disciples of the Kenshin and the other four forces still in the illusionary sun-blessed land? Did the Kenshin plan to waste time with the celestial king? Unfortunately, the rebel alliance didn't make any announcement or take any action, no matter how the people, the bigwigs, and the experts talked about it. On the other hand, the order to gather people with lofty ideals to join the alliance to suppress the rebels and overthrow the rule of the Nebula God Emperor had come into play. 3 more ancient clans and 4 top forces decided to join the Kenshin after careful consideration. The leaders of these forces were very smart. At first, they were in a state of waiting and watching. No matter how powerful the Kenshin was, they wanted to see whether the Kenshin could defeat the Celestial King. In the end, the Celestial King was played by the Kenshin and lost miserably. Now that the 99 regions of the firmament land were occupied, the Celestial King could only hide in Heaven Capital and didn't dare to take the initiative to attack. However, the Kenshin Rebel Alliance only had 5 forces and 5,000 disciples in total. No matter how capable Kenshin was, it was impossible for him to bring 5,000 disciples to attack Tiandu, which was guarded by 50,000 people. Therefore, the current stalemate was within the expectations of many experts. This gave the leaders of the ancient clans and top forces an opportunity. If they chose to side with the Kenshin at this time, they would not have to bear any risks and would even be able to show their usefulness. Even the 5 forces led by the illusory Sun sect were the first to pledge their allegiance to the Kenshin. But they are taking a big risk. Moreover, the 5 factions had pledged their loyalty to the Kenshin, but they didn't contribute much. In the end, to capture Tiandu and defeat the Celestial King in tens of thousands of troops, they still had to rely on the participation of these latecomers. The Rebel Alliance would need at least 15,000 people to be able to defeat the tens of thousands of soldiers under the command of the Celestial King under the leadership of Kenshin. From this, it could be seen that in the eyes of countless factions and experts, the Kenshin alone was worth tens of thousands of troops. The 3 ancient clans and 4 top forces all contacted the illusory Sun sect's leader in advance, hoping that he would help them convey their intentions of pledging their allegiance. The illusory Sun sect's leader naturally conveyed this to Ji Tianqing, and Ji Tianqing also expressed his agreement and acceptance. Next, the leaders of the 3 ancient clans and 4 top forces should have personally rushed to illusory Sun Paradise to pledge their allegiance to the Kenshin. However, the illusory Sun sect's leader rejected the suggestions of those leaders. The leaders of the 7 factions were unhappy and felt a little awkward, thinking, what does the illusory Sun sect's leader mean? Not letting us pledge our allegiance to the Kenshin face to face, isn't that the same as not wanting us to pledge our allegiance to the Kenshin? The leaders of the 7 factions were somewhat dissatisfied and critical of the illusory Sun sect's leader. However, they had no way of contacting the Kenshin, and they knew that the illusory Sun sect's leader was highly regarded by the Kenshin, so they could only contact the Kenshin through him. Therefore, the 7 leaders could only suppress their anger and ask the illusory Sun sect's leader what was going on. The illusory Sun sect's leader gave them a brief explanation. The general idea was that the Kenshin and the soldiers were busy carrying out a certain top-secret plan and were unable to receive them. The Kenshin's meaning was that if the leaders were truly loyal, then it was fine for them to pledge their allegiance without meeting each other. The illusory Sun sect's leader only needed to send the contents of the Heavenly Tao Oath to the 7 leaders through a communication jade slip. Once the 7 leaders read the oath and the oath took effect, the Kenshin would naturally be able to sense it. The illusory Sun sect's leader's response was very appropriate, and no one could find fault with it. The 7 leaders felt a knot in their hearts and hesitated for a long time, but they still didn't respond. Why can the illusory Sun sect's leader and those guys from the 10 Directions Pavilion see the Kenshin with their own eyes and swear their allegiance in person? When it's our turn, we can't even see the Kenshin's face and can only swear our allegiance through the air. Could this be the illusory Sun sect's leader's trick? Is he deliberately obstructing us and not letting us see the Kenshin? The illusory Sun sect's leader shouldn't have such guts, right? This might be the Kenshin's idea, or maybe they really are carrying out some secret plan. Otherwise, the Kenshin wouldn't have been so quiet for so long. Isn't the Kenshin looking down on us by telling us to swear our allegiance through the air? Then after we join the rebel alliance, it'll be very difficult for us to gain their trust and favor, right? But we've already proposed to join the Kenshin. If we go back on our word now, we'll offend the Kenshin. Moreover, the news will leak out and the Celestial King will learn of it. At that time, we won't be able to please either side. Sigh, we can only advance and not retreat. These thoughts flashed through the minds of almost all the leaders. After weighing the pros and cons, even if they had some regrets in their hearts, they could only agree to swear their allegiance through the air. The matter was thus settled. The illusory Sun sect's leader gave each of the 7 leaders a heavenly oath. When the 7 leaders saw the contents of the heavenly oath, they were indeed very strict and terrifying, similar to the contents that were circulating in the outside world. Only then did they feel much more at ease. At least, in the matter of the heavenly oath, they were treated the same as the 5 factions of the illusory Sun sect. There was no difference in treatment. Speaking of which, people were also quite strange. Those who were forced to swear their allegiance would shudder at the strict and detailed heavenly oath and be very resistant to it. And these 7 leaders were actually afraid that the heavenly oath they had to recite would be a simple version. They would rather the contents of the oath be more strict. This way, it would show that the Kenshin valued them. Not long after, the 7 leaders recited the heavenly oath and it officially took effect. Ji Tianqing, who was far away in Tiandu, immediately received a response from the heavenly Tao and confirmed that the 7 leaders had sworn their allegiance. The illusory Sun sect's leader, who was waiting in the god-slaying worship, finally let out a sigh of relief. At least, the matter of the illusory sun-blessed land being empty could be concealed for the time being. Chapter 43:13. Since everything had calmed down, the stalemate could not be broken for the time being. In that case, only Ji Tianqing could do it himself. After he sneaked into Heaven Capital, his first plan had succeeded. He successfully drove a wedge between the Celestial King's faction and the Territorial Governor's faction, which greatly reduced their loyalty. But it was not enough. It was just a foreshadowing. He carried out his second plan, which was to plunge Heaven Capital into chaos. This time, after a few days of observation and selection, he finally targeted the Territorial Governor of Qingfeng. Qingfeng was located in the center of the Firmament continent. It had a large population and rich resources. Therefore, the territorial governor of Qingfeng was one of the most powerful among the dozens of territorial governors. Many territorial governors only brought a few hundred guards to Heaven Capital, but he was so powerful that he brought 2,000 divine emperors. Among all the territorial lords, Territorial Lord Qingfeng was the oldest, the strongest, and the most respected. Most importantly, he had more than a dozen territorial governors who were on good terms with him. Among them, 3 of the domain lords had participated in the internal strife, and all 3 of them had been severely punished. For Ji Tianqing's next plan, the identity of the territorial governor of Qingfeng was the most suitable. Of course, the territorial governor of Qingfeng was at the LV7 Divine King realm and had many loyal guards around him. Ji Tianqing wanted to kill and possess the territorial governor of Qingfeng without alerting anyone. He lurked in the dark and waited patiently for 2 days. Finally, he found the right time to act. In an underground secret chamber, Ji Tianqing sneaked in while the territorial governor of Qingfeng was cultivating. He used all his strength to cast spells and multitasking. At the same time, he cast spells to seal the entire secret chamber so that no sound, fluctuation of divine power, or aura could be transmitted out. At the same time, he used his divine skill to capture the awakened territorial governor of Qingfeng. The poor territorial governor of Qingfeng ended his cultivation as quickly as possible. When he opened his eyes, he saw the stranger who had broken into the secret chamber. He could only recognize the handsome young man in a white robe. He seemed to have seen him somewhere before. Before he could recall who this person was, an invisible soul-suppressing divine power had enveloped him. He subconsciously used all his strength to resist the white-robed young man's capture and suppression. Unfortunately, the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. If the white-robed youth was a ferocious tiger, then he was a weak and powerless little rabbit. There was no doubt about the outcome. The little white rabbit was pinned down by the tiger's claw, unable to struggle or escape. After being captured and sealed, the territorial lord of Light Wind finally realized who the white-robed young man was. Kenshin. He couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise. His expression immediately changed, revealing an extremely frightened expression. He couldn't believe that Kenshin, who had been dormant for many days, actually came to Tiandu. Moreover, he had even snuck into his secret chamber and wanted to kill him. This was too dreamy. However, Ji Tianqing did not give him a chance to struggle, resist, or beg for mercy. He pressed a finger on Lord Qingfeng's forehead. Violent spiritual energy blasted into Lord Qingfeng's head, shattering his godhead. Ji Tianqing's control of his power was superb. The violent power only shattered Lord Qingfeng's godhead, but did not hurt other parts of his body. Just like that, the realm lord of Clear Wind died before he could call for help. He didn't even have time to scream. Then, Ji Tianqing took out his godhead fragment, entered the distorted spacetime of Jiutian Tenju Tower, and began to refine his spiritual memory. 4 hours had passed in the outside world. Ji Tianqing had been cultivating in the distorted spacetime for 8.5 days. He had successfully refined the memories of the realm lord of Light Wind's divine soul, and then possessed his divine body. Just like that, he transformed into the realm lord of Clear Wind. There was no difference or change in his divine body. Even his temperament and eyes were very similar. Even if there was a slight flaw or difference, no one would be able to notice it. After possessing Lord Qingfeng's body, Ji Tianqing did not immediately make a move. In order not to arouse suspicion, he would not take the initiative to stir up trouble or attract hatred. He was waiting. In a few hours, early the next morning, he would meet up with the other 5 lords to visit his 3 friends. Although the 3 lords had participated in the fight between Sheila territory and Xian territory, they were implicated and punished by Celestial King. The other lords did not dare to provoke them, so they avoided them and were indifferent. But he and the other 5 lords were friends with the 3 unlucky fellows. It had been a few days since the incident. The Celestial King's anger must have subsided. Of course, they would visit the 3 lords to show their loyalty and concern. After all, the Celestial King had made it clear that he did not treat them as human beings. They had to unite to prevent themselves from being manipulated by the Celestial King. Ji Tianqing wanted to use this opportunity to stir up trouble and create more conflicts. A few hours later, the sun rose. Ji Tianqing tidied up his appearance, walked out of the secret chamber with the unique gait of Lord Qingfeng, and entered the living room. In the living room, the deputy lord had already prepared a few gifts and told him who each gift was for. Other than the 3 territorial lords who had been punished, there were also a few gifts prepared for the commanders of the imperial guards. After all, All the punished lords and soldiers were temporarily kept in the station under the watch of the silver-armored imperial guards. They were not allowed to enter or leave as they pleased. Even though the Celestial King did not mention the word imprisonment, he said that the imperial guards would protect the soldiers and allow them to heal in peace. But everyone was well aware that it was imprisonment. The Celestial King was worried about the punished lords and soldiers. He was worried that they would cause trouble and mutiny again, so he sent the imperial guards to watch over them. For Ji Tianqing, this was a chance to deepen the conflict and stir up trouble. Soon, the other 5 lords arrived one after another. The two parties met in the living room and exchanged a few simple words. Then, Ji Tianqing led everyone to visit the 3 unlucky fellows. The 6 of them flew across the sky, crossed over a dozen mountains, and came to the top of a majestic mountain. There were a few palaces and residences on the peak of the mountain. The first domain lord to be punished and the 500 soldiers under his command lived here. When Ji Tianqing and the other 5 landed outside the palace, the 300 silver-armored imperial guards guarding the palace immediately raised their vigilance. The 2 captains of the imperial guards hurriedly flew over and shouted with a cold expression, "All territorial lords, please stop. This place is under our watch. It is not advisable to come close. Please leave quickly." Ji Tianqing immediately frowned and asked unhappily, "They have already admitted their guilt and received their punishment. They are in the station to heal their wounds. Why do you need to watch over them? Moreover, when did the Celestial King order them to be imprisoned?" The other 5 lords were also a little angry, but they did not act out. The 2 imperial guards captains were too lazy to explain. They again asked them to leave quickly. So, the lords quickly smiled and explained that they were here to visit their friends. They asked the imperial guards captains to make an exception. While explaining their intentions, the 5 of them also presented generous gifts without leaving a trace. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 43:14. Logically speaking, the territorial lords were all vassals and had great power and status. Compared to them, the 2 captains of the imperial guards in front of them were just foot soldiers. Only the commander of the imperial guards had the qualifications to sit on the same level as the territorial lords. But in this situation, the imperial guards had always been arrogant and thought highly of themselves. The few territorial lords could only endure the humiliation, suppress their anger and pretend to please the 2 captains of the imperial guards. Not only did they explain their purpose of visit, they also gave them generous gifts. The 2 captains of the imperial guards felt their vanity was greatly satisfied when they saw the nobles bowing to them and flattering them with smiles on their faces. After accepting the gifts, they vaguely agreed and allowed Ji Tianqing and the rest to visit their friends. But they could not stay for more than an hour inside. Moreover, if this matter was known by Fengyi and the commander of the imperial guards, they would never admit to receiving the gifts. The 5 territorial lords quickly nodded and agreed. Both parties reached a consensus. After Ji Tianqing and the rest entered the palace, the 2 captains of the imperial guards kept the gifts and returned to their cold demeanor. The 5 territorial lords who were all smiles just now had a black face and could not help but discuss and curse. 2 damn bastards, using a chicken feather as a token of authority, how dare they ride on our heads? Humph. Just 2 captains of the imperial guards, they do not even have the qualifications to curry favor with us. Now they are so arrogant, too hateful. Aren't they just relying on Fengyi and Celestial King's support and looking down on everyone? Celestial King does not care about our lives and even these imperial guards dare to belittle us, they really deserve to die. Brothers, to be honest, I really regret it. I should not have brought the elites and rushed to Tiandu. Shoo. Keep your voice down, don't let those bastards hear you. Don't I have the same thoughts? We're the lords of our own territories. If we stay in our own territories, we'll be the supreme lords. We came to Tiandu to work for Celestial King, but even the captains of the Imperial Guards dare to make things difficult for us. Damn it, if Tiandu opens its gates, I will definitely bring the soldiers back to our own territory. Are you confused? Our territorial lord's mansion has been captured and sealed by Kenshin, can you go back? So what? Maybe I can lead the soldiers to join Kenshin, take back the cave, and continue to be the territorial lord, and live a much better life than now. Are you crazy? How dare you say such things? Ji Tianqing sneered endlessly in his heart when he saw the region leaders getting angrier and angrier as they spoke, and the content of their words became more and more outrageous. However, he maintained a serious expression on his face and pretended to cough twice before reminding them, ahem, ahem. You guys, stop talking nonsense. You're not the only ones who have some ideas. The other dozens of domain lords might have some as well, but the Clear Wind Territorial Lord was the big brother among all the territorial lords and had a high prestige. Since he had spoken, the other domain leaders hurriedly shut their mouths. Then, they went to visit the territorial lord who had been punished and was still injured. After they met in the living room, they greeted each other warmly. Ji Tianqing and the other territorial lords took out gifts to express their concern and comfort for the territorial lord who had been punished. Speaking of the previous punishment, the domain lord's mood was still a little resentful. It was obvious that his anger had not yet subsided. He quickly cast a spell to activate the palace's defensive array, isolating it from the outside world's divine senses. Then he vented his anger. Many thanks, brothers and seniors, for coming to visit me. This time, I went to support the happy realm and seek justice for them. I didn't expect that I would suffer an undeserved calamity. Sigh. I've been thinking a lot these past few days when I was recuperating. Territorial Lord Qialu and I have been friends for many years, so I must help him when he is in trouble. So, even if I was severely punished by the Celestial King, I don't blame Territorial Lord Qialu. I just feel that this is the first time I've seen the Celestial King's true colors in 1,000 years. It's really disappointing. No wonder the Territorial Lord activated the palace's defensive array, isolating it from the outside world. His words were too disgraceful, and he was afraid that the Imperial Guards outside would hear them. Once these words reached the Celestial King's ears, not only would his future be ruined, he might even lose his life. So, the other territorial lords' expressions changed slightly, and they looked at each other. Although the other territorial lords felt the same way, Lord Qingfeng had just asked them not to talk about it, and not to say it out loud. So, the territorial lords kept silent and didn't say anything. The punished territorial lord continued, the conflict between Qialu territory and Xin territory can be big or small. It's not like there is a deep hatred between them. If the Celestial King took those of us who worked for him seriously, he could have stopped the situation and punished us accordingly. We had 100,000 soldiers before, but now there are only 50,000 left. Logically speaking, the Celestial King should care more about the lives of his soldiers. But we didn't expect Divine King Fengyi to be so vicious and ruthless, directly killing everyone in Qialu territory. Speaking of this, he sneered with contempt, probably in the eyes of the Celestial King and Divine King Fengyi, the lives of our soldiers are like grass, like ants. As long as the situation doesn't escalate and doesn't affect the stability of Tiandu, they don't care how many people they kill. You say, the master that we are loyal to and work for, actually thinks of us like this. Isn't it ridiculous? I don't care what you think, I just want to say. From now on, my men and I will stay here in seclusion to heal. Even if my injuries are healed, even if Kenshin leads an army into Tiandu, I will never fight again and work for the Celestial King. F***ck loyalty, F***ck achievements. At the end of his speech, the territorial lord cursed angrily. The other territorial lords were also moved. Considering that the palace had a defensive formation, they didn't care about anything and followed suit. Yes. Brother Lin, although we didn't personally experience this, we know the ins and outs of this matter. Overall, we understand your feelings very well. Don't we feel the same as you, disappointed and bitterly disappointed? Sigh. In the past 1,000 years, the firmament continent was peaceful. The celestial king sat firmly on the throne and didn't have to worry about anything. Now that I think about it, his unparalleled wisdom and outstanding scheming deeds were mostly made up and acted out. Anyway, he was the overlord of the continent, everyone would praise him. Ha ha ha. No matter how great he was praised before, now that he met Kenshin, he immediately returned to his original state. He and Kenshin didn't even meet face to face, and he was casually crushed and trampled by Kenshin. What a useless and cowardly person. The celestial king is useless and has no strategy, but he is also so cold-blooded and tyrannical. End of chapter. Chapter 43:15. The territorial masters opened their hearts and spoke their minds, unscrupulously slandering the celestial king. Of course, they felt that what they said was the truth and had no intention of slandering him. Ji Tianqing listened from the side, but he didn't interrupt. His expression remained calm. But in fact, he was already laughing in his heart. Obviously, his plan to sow discord was very effective. After the territorial masters vented their anger, they felt much better. Especially the territorial master who was punished. Seeing that his friends understood and supported him, and that everyone had the same feeling, his mood suddenly brightened. However, when one of the territorial lords saw that Ji Tianqing was silent, he thought that Ji Tianqing was unhappy. He quickly smiled apologetically and said, "Senior Qing Feng, we're just saying. We don't have any intention of rebelling. Just pretend that you didn't hear anything and don't take it to heart." Hearing him say this, the territorial masters reacted and quickly looked at Ji Tianqing. Seeing Ji Tianqing's expression, they suddenly felt guilty and regretful. They quickly defended themselves. Although they were all friends and stood on the same side, they should have a common enemy and hate the celestial king. But the territorial masters were worried that the territorial master of Qingfeng was too blindly loyal and could not bear to hear such treacherous words. If the territorial master of Qingfeng's brain went haywire and told the celestial king, then they would be in trouble. However, Ji Tianqing raised his hand and interrupted them. He smiled and said, "Don't be nervous. I have known you for hundreds of years. Do you still know my nature? Don't forget, we are grasshoppers on the same rope. Our position is the same as everyone else's. Isn't what you're saying also what this old man is thinking? But we are in heaven capital and under the eyes of the celestial king. In the future, when we discuss this matter, please be careful to keep it a secret. If you are not absolutely reliable, don't show your rebellious thoughts towards the celestial king and your close relationship with the Kenshin. Otherwise, the celestial king will definitely treat us as traitors who have sided with the Kenshin and kill us without hesitation." Hearing the domain lord of Clear Wind's earnest words, the other 6 domain lords all nodded seriously, indicating that they would listen and pay attention. Even though the phrase, closeness to Kenshin, startled the domain leaders. They were a little puzzled. We were only criticizing the celestial king. When did we say we were going to side with the Kenshin? However, everyone understood what the realm lord of Clear Wind was trying to say, so they didn't care about this detail. Moreover, if the celestial king knew that they were discussing this behind their backs, he would definitely treat them as traitors. It would be no different from defecting to the Kenshin. Everyone conversed for an entire hour before leaving one after another. Next, Ji Tianqing led the 5 territorial lords to visit the second territorial lord who had been punished. This territorial lord and his 800 soldiers also lived in a palace and mansion on the peak of a mountain. When Ji Tianqing and the other 5 territorial lords arrived at the peak of the mountain, they saw that there were also 200 imperial guards standing guard outside the palace and mansion. Just as they were about to approach, two Imperial Guard captains came up to them and ordered them to stay back with an indifferent expression. The general situation was the same as before. The 5 territorial lords could only suppress their anger, put on a smiling face, and took out gifts to put in a good word with the 2 Imperial Guard captains. The 2 Imperial Guard captains' vanity was satisfied. After accepting the gifts, they allowed the 5 territorial lords to enter. The 5 territorial lords walked in front, and Ji Tianqing followed behind. However, just as the 5 territorial lords took 2 steps, Ji Tianqing was stopped by the 2 Imperial Guard captains. The 2 Imperial Guard captains looked at Ji Tianqing with a mocking expression and sneered, "The commander has ordered that no one is allowed to visit or approach. Please leave." Hearing this, Ji Tianqing immediately frowned, and his eyes flashed with deep shame and anger. The 5 territorial lords also stopped and looked at the 2 Imperial Guard captains in shock. Their brows were full of anger. Obviously, even a fool would understand what was going on. The 5 territorial lords presented gifts and put in a good word with a smiling face, and the Imperial Guard captains allowed them to enter. However, Ji Tianqing did not present any gifts or put in a good word with a smiling face. As usual, he maintained the posture of a territorial lord, with the temperament of a reserved and arrogant expert. If it was in the past, no one would find anything wrong with it, because the territorial lord of Qingfeng had always been like this. However, the situation was different now. The 2 Imperial Guard captains' vanity was inflated. Seeing that the 5 territorial lords were trying to please them, they naturally could not stand the territorial lord of Qingfeng's arrogance. They took this opportunity to make things difficult for the territorial lord of Qingfeng and embarrass him. The other 5 territorial lords respected the territorial lord of Qingfeng, so naturally, they would not let Ji Tianqing make a fool of himself. They hurriedly argued with the 2 Imperial Guard captains. "Captains, the territorial lord of Qingfeng came with us. We are all here to visit a friend. The territorial lord of Qingfeng is a highly respected senior. Even if God King Fengyi is here, he will have to show some respect. I advise you to make an exception for him." "That's right. We have already given you gifts to express our sincerity. The territorial lord of Qingfeng came with us. Captains, you can't humiliate him like this." If it was in the past, the territorial lords would not even bother to pay attention to the 2 Imperial Guard captains. If such a thing had really happened, the territorial lords would have been angry and even reprimanded them. However, now, the territorial lords could only defend themselves, show weakness, and plead for leniency. The 2 Imperial Guard captains became more complacent. They sneered and said, "The 5 of you are reasonable, so we can make an exception. However, the territorial lord of Qingfeng seems to be looking down on us. Don't blame us for enforcing the law impartially." Ha! Territorial lords, please think twice before you speak. We are enforcing the law impartially. How can we accept bribes? We only made an exception because of your sincere attitude. After accepting the gifts, the 2 Imperial Guard captains would definitely not admit to it. Since they had already fallen out with the territorial lord of Qingfeng, they could not show weakness. Naturally, they would make things difficult for the territorial lord and force him to bow down. Unexpectedly, the territorial lord of Qingfeng, who had been upright, plain-spoken, and dignified for many years, did not change his character. He flew into a rage on the spot. He glared at the 2 Imperial Guard captains and scolded them harshly, "Bastards! Don't you know your place and try to blackmail me? You are just 2 Imperial Guard captains. How dare you behave so arrogantly in front of me? Are you tired of living?" As he scolded them, Ji Tianqing also released the aura of a high-level God King and shrouded the 2 Imperial Guard captains. The 2 Imperial Guard captains were only second-degree low-level God Kings. They were immediately pushed back by the invisible aura. They took a few steps back and their faces turned pale. They almost fell to the ground. After they steadied themselves, they looked at Ji Tianqing in shock and fear. They revealed an expression of disbelief. They had never expected that the white-bearded old man in front of them would be so unreasonable, stubborn, and rigid. Chapter 43:16. However, the two captains were only shocked by Ji Tianqing's aura for a moment before they quickly regained their senses. The fear and astonishment in their hearts dissipated and was replaced by a thick sense of anger and shame. Thinking of the status of the territorial masters in the Celestial King's heart and the Imperial Guards in the Celestial King's eyes, the two captains immediately regained their confidence. Territorial Master of Qingfeng, how dare you insult the Imperial Guards? We are only captains of the Imperial Guards and have a low status. We can tolerate your insults. However, you can't insult the 8,000 Imperial Guards like this. The Imperial Guards are the guards of the Celestial King. You are insulting the Celestial King. Territorial Master of Qingfeng, although your rank is higher than ours, don't forget where you are. This is not your Qingfeng territory. You can't behave atrociously here. The two captains of the Imperial Guards were not stupid. They immediately pinned the accusation of insulting the Imperial Guards and humiliating the Celestial King on Ji Tianqing's head. Ji Tianqing, the fake territorial master of Qingfeng, was a very realistic portrayal of the territorial master of Qingfeng's temperament. He was so angry that his face was ashen and his white beard was trembling. He pointed at the two captains of the Imperial Guards and scolded, "How dare you? You are the ones who extorted and accepted bribes. How dare you be so arrogant when you blackmailed me? Despicable and shameless bastard, you actually dare to frame this old man and frame me with a crime? Today, I must find Fengyi God King to be the judge. Even if I have to report this to the Celestial King, I will prove my innocence and let the Celestial King punish you two vermin, scum." Hearing his words, the two captains of the Imperial Guards were stunned and felt a little guilty. After all, they did accept bribes. Once the matter became serious, the governor of the Imperial Guards would definitely punish them. However, they did not expect this white-bearded old man to be so unreasonable and stubborn. The other 5 domain leaders, seeing that both sides had formed a grudge and that the matter was about to escalate, hurriedly tried to persuade him. "Captains, Lord Qingfeng is a man of virtue and prestige. He has always been upright and unyielding. Even the Celestial King admires him. How can you treat him like this? Senior Qingfeng, please calm down. This is only a small matter, a misunderstanding. There is no need for us to let God King Fengyi know. Yes, yes, yes. Everyone, let's take a step back and pretend nothing happened." Thinking of God King Fengyi's cruel methods, a few of the domain lords shuddered. They quickly acted as mediators to prevent the matter from getting out of hand. Who knew that when the two captains of the Imperial Army saw this situation, they knew that the domain lords were guilty and became more confident. Furthermore, the Celestial King clearly did not care about the lives of these domain masters and soldiers. The Imperial Guards were the direct subordinates of the Celestial King. The Imperial Guards governor and God King Fengyi would protect them. Thinking of this, the two captains of the Imperial Guards puffed out their chests and sneered, "This matter can be big or small. It depends on how Lord Qingfeng views and resolves it. Don't blame us for being merciless. As long as Lord Qingfeng retracts his words and apologizes to us, this matter can be considered over." That's right. When Lord Qingfeng is angry, he scolded us so harshly. No matter what, he should apologize to us. As for the gifts to comfort and compensate us, there's no need for that. We're not greedy people. Logically speaking, as long as Ji Tianqing admitted his mistake and apologized, this matter could be considered over. However, this was an opportunity that Ji Tianqing had purposely planned. How could he let this matter be resolved? If it were the other 5 domain lords, they would have suppressed their anger and humiliation and apologized. However, the 5 domain lords had a bad premonition. They looked at Ji Tianqing nervously. Based on their understanding of Lord Qingfeng, they had guessed that this stubborn senior would not bow down. As they had expected. Ji Tianqing was so angry that he laughed. He pointed at the 2 captains of the Imperial Guards and scolded, "Good. You guys are truly shameless to the extreme. You've really broadened my horizons. You want me to apologize to you 2 bastards? Not even in my next life. This old man has done nothing wrong, so why should I lower my head to you? Do you deserve it? Scums and bastards like you, I will not only scold you, but also eradicate you." After scolding, Ji Tianqing unleashed his strength of the 7th King God realm. He suppressed the 2 captains of the Imperial Guards with his powerful God realm strength and used his capturing technique to grab them. "Damn it! Are you crazy? How dare you attack us? Have you thought about the consequences?" The 2 captains of the Imperial Guards were startled. They screamed and turned around to run away. Around the palace and the courtyard, the 2 Imperial Guards saw that the situation was not good. They immediately came to help. However, Lord Qingfeng's strength and means were much stronger than the 2 captains of the Imperial Guards. The 2 captains of the Imperial Guards had just run 1,000 zhang away when they were caught by Ji Tianqing. He sealed the 2 captains of the Imperial Guards' God realm strength with a technique. Then, he grabbed the captains of the Imperial Guards, 1 in each hand, turned around and flew into the sky, heading straight for the capital God Palace. This series of actions were completed in the blink of an eye. It was too fast for the eyes to take in. The 5 Protectorate Masters were stunned. When they came to their senses, Ji Tianqing had already flown 30,000 li away and disappeared into the horizon. "It's over. Go after him. What are you waiting for? Go and get Lord Qingfeng back. Don't let Lord Qingfeng reach the capital God Palace. Otherwise, things will get out of hand. We are already estranged from the Celestial King's subordinates. Lord Qingfeng is forcing the Celestial King to make a choice." "What choice?" "In the eyes of the Celestial King, we are not as important as the Imperial Guards. There's no need to guess. We are the unlucky ones." The 5 Protectorate Masters turned pale with fright. They anxiously flew into the sky and chased after Ji Tianqing. While they were hurrying, the 5 of them were still discussing telepathically. They were very anxious. However, they were only worried about their own situation. No one blamed Lord Qingfeng for being too impulsive. This was because everyone knew that the territorial Lord of Clear Wind had always been like this. He had never changed. Moreover, this matter was caused by the 2 captains of the Imperial Guards who had deliberately stirred up trouble. Given Lord Qingfeng's temperament, it would be strange if he could bear the humiliation and admit his mistake. Ji Tianqing carried the 2 captains of the Imperial Guards as if he were carrying chickens. Along the way, many Imperial Guards, Protectorate Masters, and soldiers witnessed this. The 2 captains of the Imperial Guards were so humiliated that they wanted to commit suicide. On the other hand, Ji Tianqing's murderous aura and uncontrollable rage caused countless people to speculate and discuss. Immediately after, the 5 region lords also hurriedly caught up and chased after Ji Tianqing without regard for anything else. This scene quickly spread and incited endless discussion among tens of thousands of soldiers. Heaven Capital, which had finally calmed down, was once again bustling with noise and excitement. After the previous conflict, the Protectorate Masters and the Celestial King's subordinates had long been estranged. And now, Lord Qingfeng had captured 2 captains of the Imperial Guards. Everyone had a premonition that this matter would blow up and the 2 sides would definitely break off. Chapter 43:17 Dutian Deity Palace was the most sacred and majestic palace in Tiandu. It was the palace where officials discussed matters and also the residence of the Celestial King. At this moment, Feng Yi was busy elsewhere and the Celestial King was handling official business in his study. Only 2 commanders of the Imperial Army were guarding Dutian Deity Palace with nearly 1,000 Imperial guards. Seeing Ji Tianqing carrying 2 captains of the Imperial Army and flying over at lightning speed, the Imperial Army commander and the rest of the Imperial Army were dumbfounded. Everyone didn't understand what was going on. What was going on? They had not heard of anything major happening in Tiandu. Why would the territorial governor of Qingfeng capture 2 captains of the Imperial Army and rush to Dutian Deity Palace with a murderous aura? Looking at his posture, was he here to denounce him? But why would the 2 captains of the Imperial Army offend him? Filled with doubts, the 2 commanders of the Imperial Army went up and stopped the territorial governor. Cool breeze, Territorial Lord, please wait. Territorial Lord Qingfeng, where are you going with my 2 subordinates? The commanders of the Imperial Army were of a higher status than the captains of the Imperial Army. Even in the past, the commanders of the Imperial Army were qualified to talk to the territorial governor. Their status was only half a level lower. Naturally, Ji Tianqing wouldn't reveal any flaws. He immediately slowed down and said angrily, "These 2 bastards broke the law and blackmailed me, yet they still dare to be so arrogant. How can I let them go?" The reason he came to the capital deity palace was naturally to find the deity king and the Imperial Guard governor to reason things out. What are you waiting for? Go and report to them. The 2 commanders of the Imperial Army were dumbfounded and looked at the 2 captains of the Imperial Army in confusion. In their opinion, even if the Imperial Guards were arrogant, they would not be so arrogant as to blackmail the territorial governor of Qingfeng. How could the 2 captains of the Imperial Army admit their wrongdoings when they saw their backer? The 2 of them hurriedly shouted that they had been wronged. "Lord Commander, we were wrongly accused. The territorial governor is slandering us. He is framing us. There is a misunderstanding. It was the other domain leaders who coerced us into breaking the rules. We refused to do so, and that's why old Qingfeng was so angry." The 2 commanders of the Imperial Army heaved a sigh of relief when they realized there was a story behind this. The 2 of them hurriedly stopped the Lord of Qingfeng and said with a fake smile, "Please calm down, Lord of Qingfeng. The cause and process of this matter have yet to be verified. You are hurting the dignity of the Imperial Guards by carrying our subordinates like this. Let them go first." Region Lord Qingfeng, this is the capital God Palace. Please give the Imperial Guard some face and don't make things too ugly. Otherwise, no one will be able to bear the responsibility if the Divine King is angered. Since the 2 Imperial Army marshals had said that, if it were a normal prefecture lord, he would not continue to pester them. Territorial governor was. He was a righteous and upright role model who was not afraid of power. How could he be scared? "You 2, stop putting on airs in front of this old man. This old man didn't come here today to talk nonsense with you. Get out of my way. I am going to find the commander of the Imperial Army and the Divine King." Ji Tianqing scolded the 2 commanders of the Imperial Army and was about to break into the main hall with the 2 captains of the Imperial Army. Seeing that the 2 commanders of the Imperial Army were blocking his way and would not let him pass, he was enraged. He released a terrifying killing intent that swept toward the 2 commanders of the Imperial Army. "Get out of my way." Ji Tianqing sent the 2 commanders of the Imperial Army flying with his majestic divine power. He carried the 2 captains of the Imperial Army and barged into the main hall of the Imperial Army. When the 2 commanders of the Imperial Army regained their balance and regained their senses, they were furious and wanted to call for someone to stop Ji Tianqing. However, Ji Tianqing had already rushed into the main hall and shouted loudly for Divine King Fengyi, the commander of the Imperial Army, and the Celestial King to uphold justice. The 2 commanders of the Imperial Army rushed into the main hall but could not do anything. As for the imperial guards who had heard the news and wanted to capture the territorial lord of Light Wind, they were also dumbfounded. They stood there in a daze, not knowing what to do. Soon after, the 5 territorial lords arrived as fast as lightning. They did not dare to be as domineering as the territorial governor of the imperial army and divine King Fengyi. After being stopped by the 2 commanders of the imperial army, they did not dare to force their way in. They quickly explained to the 2 commanders of the imperial army and pleaded for leniency. Unfortunately, the situation had developed to this stage and was no longer within the control of the 2 commanders of the imperial army. In a short while, divine King Fengyi brought a few divine generals and the commander of the imperial army to the main hall. Before they could ask Ji Tianqing what had happened, the commander of the imperial army was startled. The celestial king was also alarmed and came to the main hall. Now, with so many experts gathered in the main hall, the situation had become serious and there was no turning back. It had reached a point where it had to be resolved. The celestial king sat at the head of the table with a cold expression. He looked down at the people in the main hall and his eyebrows were furrowed with anger. He only wanted the soldiers under his command to calm down, unite as one, and focus on preparing for battle. Never had he imagined that these region lords would repeatedly cause trouble, and it caused him to be extremely displeased and furious. Ji Tianqing, the 2 captains of the imperial army, and the 5 territorial governors were all involved. They could only stand in the middle of the main hall and wait for the celestial king's judgment. Divine King Fengyi, the commander of the imperial army, and a few divine generals stood on both sides of the main hall and watched the situation develop. Territorial governor of the imperial army, why don't you tell me how this happened? The celestial king looked at Ji Tianqing expressionlessly and asked in a deep voice. After all, the status of the territorial governor of the imperial army was much higher than that of the 2 captains of the imperial army. Even if the celestial king was biased towards his own subordinates, he could not be too obvious about it. Of course, he had to consider the feelings of the territorial governors. Ji Tianqing made some slight changes to the story and told it to everyone. His story was 90% true and 1 lie. Even the 2 captains of the imperial army did not find anything wrong with it. However, they did not feel comfortable and felt that something was not right. As for the bystanders, divine King Fengyi, the commander of the imperial army, and a few divine generals, they understood the meaning behind Ji Tianqing's words. He was clearly saying that the imperial army was too arrogant. A mere captain of the imperial army dared to make things difficult for the territorial governors. He even dared to extort and blackmail them. He was really lawless. If the celestial king did not punish and discipline the imperial army, it would be difficult for the imperial army and the territorial governors to work together in the future. Ji Tianqing's words made the celestial king even more unhappy and angry. He had enough reason to suspect that the territorial governor of the imperial army was using this as an excuse to sow discord. However, it had happened. Given the status and experience of the territorial governor of the imperial army, there was no way he would let this matter rest after being humiliated and made things difficult for him. Therefore, he had to give a reasonable judgment to resolve the conflict between the 2 sides. Chapter 43:18. After asking Ji Tianqing, God King Empyrean seemed to have no intention of questioning the 2 captains. The 2 captains were too lowly in status. They were intimidated by the celestial king's authority and did not dare to speak. The governor was a little anxious and quickly signaled the 2 captains with his eyes. The 2 captains immediately understood what he meant and were emboldened. They immediately complained to the celestial king. Your Excellency, we are innocent. You can't just listen to the Lord of Qingfeng's side of the story. Your Excellency, please understand. We are lowly people. How could we dare to make things difficult for the lords? They forced us to violate the rules and failed to coerce us. That's why they flew into a rage out of humiliation and slandered us. The two captains cried their innocence. The celestial king saw that there was more to the story and immediately became spirited. He ordered sternly, "The two of you should think carefully about the truth of the matter. Think carefully before you speak. The Lord of Qingfeng is a person of virtue and prestige. He is not someone you can casually criticize." On the surface, it seemed that he was reprimanding the two captains and telling them not to slander the Lord of Qingfeng. But in reality, everyone understood the subtext. The two captains were no longer afraid and hurriedly defended themselves. "Your Excellency, we were ordered by the governor to guard the Sunrise Peak and protect the palace and mansion to prevent the injured soldiers from being disturbed. However, the 6 lords insisted on barging in. We strongly disagreed, so they used both the carrot and the stick to threaten and force us to accept the gifts. Although the lords are of high status and we dare not offend them, we could not let down the governor's trust and cultivation. We were determined not to violate the rules. Therefore, we insisted on not allowing the lords to enter. This angered the Lord of Qingfeng. He thought that we disrespected him and humiliated him." Hearing the two captains' sophistry, the governor heaved a sigh of relief and his eyes calmed down. God King Fengyi was also expressionless. He had already guessed the answer and result. The other 5 lords were not convinced and hurriedly explained the truth of the matter. However, the celestial king did not want to listen to them anymore. He waved his hand and interrupted the leaders. He said in a dignified tone, "All right, all of you, shut up. I've already figured out the ins and outs of the matter. It was my idea to send the Imperial Guards to guard those mountains. You want to visit your friends, this is a moral act, there is nothing wrong with that. But why didn't you ask for my permission? They acted without permission and even used bribery and coercion to force the Imperial Guards to let them go against the rules. You knowingly broke the law. Have you ever put me in your eyes? Have you ever taken the laws laid down by His Majesty the God Emperor to heart?" The celestial king reprimanded Ji Tianqing and the 5 area masters. Then he turned to the 2 captains of the imperial army and said, "Although you were following orders and did stop the area masters from breaking in, your will was not strong enough. You were still threatened by their identity. This is blasphemy against the rules of the imperial army. The fact that you accepted the other party's gift is also an irrefutable fact. I'll temporarily strip you of your positions and demote you to ordinary imperial guards. You will continue to be soldiers and learn the law and rules well. Do you have any objections?" The 2 captains of the imperial army were stunned. Their hearts were filled with panic and anxiety. It took them 100 years to climb from ordinary soldiers to the position of captains. They did not expect that because of this small matter, their captains' positions would be taken away. Of course, the 2 of them objected to this result and wanted the imperial army governor to plead for them. However, when they saw the expression and eyes of the imperial army governor, they knew that the governor was satisfied with this result and would not plead for them. Therefore, the 2 captains of the imperial army could only bow and accept the order and thank the celestial king for not killing them. After the 2 captains of the imperial army left, the celestial king looked at Ji Tianqing and the 5 area masters. With a dignified expression, he ordered, "As area masters, the 6 of you ignored the rules set by me and His Majesty the God Emperor. You have disappointed me. This time, I won't punish you. I'll punish you to hand over your military power and stay in the encampment to recuperate and reflect on your mistakes." God King Fengyi and the imperial army governor expressed their satisfaction and support for this punishment. They quickly agreed. However, the expressions of Ji Tianqing and the 5 area masters became very ugly. Their eyes were filled with anger. Indeed, the celestial king had learned to be smart. He did not punish the area masters and soldiers like last time. This was because he knew that punishing the area masters and soldiers would not make them repent. Instead, it would make them hate him and bear resentment. Moreover, after being punished, the soldiers would not be able to participate in the battle. This would undoubtedly weaken the fighting power of his side. Now, the Celestial King had taken away the military power of the 6 area masters and taken over the 4,000 soldiers under their command. This would not weaken the fighting power of his side. At the same time, the 6 area masters were punished to reflect on their mistakes. At the appropriate time, they could be sent to the battlefield to kill the enemy and redeem themselves. Most importantly, the Celestial King believed that most of the soldiers would not have any resentment. However, the Celestial King thought that his methods were brilliant and that his punishment was very reasonable. The 6 area masters would definitely swallow their anger and obediently hand over their military power. Unfortunately, the area master of Qingfeng showed his usual tough and upright nature. He immediately retorted, "Your Majesty the Celestial King, this old man does not accept your punishment. This matter was originally caused by the imperial army's arrogance and despotism. They unscrupulously made things difficult for this old man and the area masters. We respected you and came to confront and judge you in court. I did not expect that in the end, you would still shield the imperial army and punish us severely. Haha, this old man has been loyal to His Majesty the God Emperor all my life. I have great respect for you and His Majesty the God Emperor. I did not expect that I would end up like this. This old man also did not expect that in your heart, my position and that of the area masters are not worth mentioning." As soon as these words came out, the entire hall was shocked. Not only Feng Yi and the governor of the imperial army were shocked, but even the 5 area masters were looking at him in disbelief. No one had expected that the area master of Qingfeng would be so stubborn and reckless that he dared to say these words in front of the Celestial King. This kind of rebellious words, which contained antonyms, was enough to just think about it. How could he say it out loud? The Celestial King was also stunned for a moment. When he came to his senses, he was furious. He sternly rebuked, "Area Master of Qingfeng, how dare you? What? Are you taking advantage of your seniority to betray me and His Majesty the God Emperor?" Ji Tianqing shook his head in disappointment and said with a cold smile, "Justice is in everyone's heart. Since you are unfair and selfish, don't blame your soldiers for being resentful. You're the leader, and I'm just a subordinate. You can give me whatever crime you want to commit. As for the military power, you only need to give an order to take it away. Why do you have to direct and act out such a clumsy show? Forget it, this old man is disheartened. Please allow me to go back and reflect on my mistakes." Chapter 43:19. After saying this, Ji Tianqing glanced at the Celestial King coldly and contemptuously, then turned and left the hall. His back was as tall and stubborn as ever, but there was also a sense of desolation and loneliness. At this moment, the hall was deathly silent. Everyone was stunned. Everyone knew that the Lord of the Cool Breeze territory was stubborn, upright. He was a man of virtue and prestige. But no one had expected him to be so stubborn. For the sake of his lifelong reputation, he did not know how to compromise or endure. He directly said what was on his mind, tore off the tacit understanding between the ruler and his subjects, and forced both sides into a desperate situation. From the moment he said this, it was impossible for both sides to reconcile. On the other hand, his expression that was filled with disappointment, bleakness, and desolation fully displayed how disheartened he was and how he disregarded life and death. The most shocking thing was that, the Lord of the Cool Breeze territory had revealed the truth. The so-called Imperial Guards were guarding the peaks and did not allow anyone to visit them. This led to the conflict between the territorial lords and the Imperial Guard captain, and then to the confrontation in the hall, where the Celestial King stripped the territorial lords of their military power. All of this was a show directed and arranged by the Celestial King himself. His purpose was to seize the military power of the territorial lords in a dignified way. Understanding this, the 5 territorial lords were suddenly enlightened. They were instantly filled with respect and admiration for the Lord of the Cool Breeze territory. They admired the wisdom of the Lord of the Cool Breeze territory. He had seen through the truth and had the courage to expose the despicable means of the Celestial King to his face. This was something they could not do. Therefore, the 5 territorial lords, who had come to their senses, were infected by the Lord of the Cool Breeze territory. They looked at each other, then looked firmly at the Celestial King and said in unison, "We will advance and retreat together with the Lord of the Cool Breeze territory. We are willing to hand over our military power. We only hope that the Divine King will be lenient and not ruin the Lord of the Cool Breeze territory's lifelong reputation. Return our innocence." After saying this, the 5 territorial lords took out their tiger soldier seals, threw them in the hall, and turned to leave. Perhaps it was due to the influence of the realm Lord of Light Wind that they didn't show any attachment to power. They were especially proud and unyielding, and their postures were very free and easy. After they left the hall, God King Fengyi, the inspector of the Forbidden Army, and the God Generals looked at each other. The Celestial King, who had finally come to his senses, was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. His face was as black as the bottom of a pot as he roared furiously. "Bastard! Damnable bastard, you actually dare to look down on me like this. I directed and acted on my own, deliberately acting to seize their military power. Detestable old thing, how dare you frame me like this? Ah! Men, capture that old bastard Clear Wind territorial lord. I want to behead him in public." Of course, Celestial King felt wronged and angry. He didn't do anything, but in the end, he became a despicable person who directed and acted out his own plot to seize military power. However, the territorial lord of Clear Wind had spoken so clearly and acted so fearlessly. Anyone who knew what had happened would believe the territorial lord of Clear Wind's words and think that it was his plot. Even God King Fengyi and the inspector of the Forbidden Army felt a little guilty. They secretly thought that this might really be the Celestial King's plot. After all, this was in line with Celestial King's usual style. Hearing the Celestial King's roar, the inspector of the Forbidden Army and the God Generals acknowledged the order and immediately went to capture the territorial lord of Clear Wind. However, God King Fengyi was able to keep calm and quickly stop them. "Wait! Your Excellency, please don't be foolish. You can't capture or kill the territorial lord of Clear Wind. Now that he has been wronged, he is disheartened. If you behead him in public, I'm afraid it will be exactly what he wants. He could use his death to prove his innocence and preserve his reputation for the rest of his life. As for you, you will be labeled as a muddlehead." Hearing God King Fengyi's reminder, the Celestial King calmed down. When he thought of the possible consequences, he could only suppress his anger and withdraw the order. However, his anger had not subsided. He asked unwillingly, "If I can't kill the territorial lord of Clear Wind, do I have to swallow my anger and bear the stigma?" God King Fengyi also had a headache. He frowned and thought for a while. Then he said, "I can't think of a good solution at the moment. However, you must not be rash. This matter needs to be considered at length." The Celestial King remained silent. He could only gnash his teeth and clench his fists so tightly that creaking sounds could be heard. At the same time, Ji Tianqing was standing in the square outside Dutian God Palace. Many Forbidden Army soldiers and more than 20 territorial lords were gathered around the square. These territorial lords were acquainted with him or were on good terms with the 5 territorial lords. Everyone had a deep or shallow relationship with each other. Previously, when they saw Ji Tianqing and the 5 territorial lords rushing to Dutian God Palace, they guessed that something big had happened. Therefore, they rushed over to check on the situation. Everything that had happened in the meeting hall, including the Celestial King's verdict and Ji Tianqing's unyielding words, was heard clearly by everyone. When Ji Tianqing walked to the square, more than 20 territorial lords came forward to welcome him. They all looked at him with complicated expressions. Some bowed and greeted him, expressing their respect and admiration. Some comforted him. Their expressions and emotions were also very disappointed and downcast. There were also some territorial lords who admired his character. They also expressed their grief and indignation against a common enemy. Immediately after, the 5 territorial lords also left the hall and came behind Ji Tianqing. Many territorial lords had witnessed their audacity to throw the tiger tally in the hall and give the celestial king a hard time. Everyone was also full of admiration for the 5 of them. They hurriedly came forward to comfort and praise them. After the previous conflict, many territorial lords had unknowingly stood on the same side and were dissatisfied with the celestial king. What happened today made these territorial lords completely disappointed in the celestial king. They also hated the arrogant and despotic Forbidden Army even more. Ji Tianqing was very satisfied with the current outcome. He looked at the many territorial lords with a bleak expression. He smiled bitterly and said, "My colleagues, I've made a fool of myself. Perhaps I was a little impulsive and reckless today, but I would rather break than submit. I would rather die to prove my sincerity than suffer an unjust injustice and ruin my reputation. If the celestial king wanted military power, why did he have to go through so much trouble and devise such dirty schemes? He only needed to say the word and I would have given him 2,000 soldiers. But if he wants to ruin my reputation, would rather die than comply. In addition, everyone should go back and make preparations." Hearing this, many territorial lords were stunned. Someone asked doubtfully, "Senior Qing Feng, what do we need to prepare?" Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "Today's matter is only the beginning. The celestial king went through so much trouble just to take back military power. I believe you all saw it. So, everyone should be tactful and obediently hand over military power. You can also be exempted from punishment and charges. Don't let the celestial king go through the trouble of taking everyone's military power one by one. It's not good for anyone." When he finished speaking, all the territorial lords were dumbfounded. They burst into a burst of exclamations. Everyone's expression became very ugly. Chapter 43:20. Before Ji Tianqing pointed it out, many of the territorial lords were just grieving for the loss of their fellow territorial lords. They were all angry at the same enemy and sympathized with the territorial lord of Light Wind and the others. But after hearing Ji Tianqing's words, they finally understood the celestial king's true motive. He did not want to take the military power of the territorial lord of Clear Wind and the others. He wanted to use them as an example to make an example out of them and take away the military power of all the other territorial lords. The 20 or so territorial lords instantly panicked. They believed the territorial lord of Clear Wind's words completely. But they could not be as righteous and proud as the territorial lord of Clear Wind. They could not give up their military power so easily and decisively to protect their chastity and reputation. Even though the 20 or so territorial lords each only had a few hundred soldiers under their command. However, those soldiers were their direct subordinates, the most loyal and reliable elites. If they were forced to hand over those elite soldiers, they would become commanders without an army in name and would have no power to speak of. Not only would they lose their confidence, but they would also lose their sense of security. Therefore, they could not give up their military power no matter what. If the celestial king really wanted to use force to force them to hand over their soldiers, then they would rather betray him than submit. If the celestial king was heartless, then don't blame them for being unrighteous. Similar thoughts flashed through the minds of all the territorial lords. They gritted their teeth in hatred. Originally, Ji Tianqing wanted to say a few more words to incite the territorial lords to resist. But the celestial king and supreme being Fengyi, who were in the meeting hall, heard the commotion in the square and his words. The celestial king was so angry that he almost went berserk. He immediately brought Supreme Being Fengyi and the others over to explain. Perhaps he would not be able to suppress his anger and order the arrest of Ji Tianqing. When Ji Tianqing saw that the situation wasn't good, he threw down a sentence and hurriedly left with the 5 region lords. All right, I have to go back and explain to the soldiers. Everyone, go and prepare as soon as possible. Many of the territorial lords heard this and felt even more conflicted. They whispered to each other angrily. Suddenly, someone shouted, "Let's go. The celestial king is here." Many domain lords turned their heads and saw Empyrean God King storming out of the hall with a dark face and God King Fengyi and the others. They looked like they were about to storm in. Everyone's heart skipped a beat. They didn't dare to stay any longer. They hurriedly turned around and flew away in all directions. All of you, stop. Divine King Fengyi frowned. He subconsciously raised his hand and shouted for the domain lords to stop. Unexpectedly, not only did the region lords not stop, they even sped up and vanished in the blink of an eye. Empyrean God King was furious at the sight of this. He stopped at the entrance of the main hall and stood under the eaves of the corridor. He pointed at the empty square and cursed furiously, "These damn bastards, how dare they slander me like this? Now, they don't even listen to my orders. Are they trying to rebel?" The celestial king was furious. Divine King Fengyi could only shut his mouth and sigh helplessly in his heart. The governor of the Forbidden Army and the other divine generals also shrunk their necks and lowered their heads. They didn't dare to interrupt. Everyone was well aware that the situation was getting worse. Today's matter would soon spread throughout Tiandu and be known by tens of thousands of soldiers. It was no longer important what the truth was. No matter how the celestial king explained, the dozens of territorial lords and tens of thousands of soldiers would believe that he was trying to seize military power. After a long silence, the celestial king's anger gradually dissipated. He brought Divine King Fengyi, the governor of the Forbidden Army, and the other generals to the study room for a discussion. In the spacious and luxurious study room, the celestial king sat down and drank 3 cups of tea in one go. Only then did he calm down. Divine King Fengyi and the others stood in front of the study table. They were a little nervous as they pondered silently. After a moment of silence, the celestial king opened his mouth and said, "Today's matter can't be concealed or suppressed. Otherwise, it will backfire and cause the soldiers to retaliate even more. That old bastard Qin Feng deliberately slandered me and spread rumors. Soon, the soldiers will know. Do you have any way to eliminate the impact of this matter?" Divine King Fengyi thought for a moment and persuaded, "My lord, based on our understanding of the territorial lord of Qin Feng, he has always been this straightforward and stubborn. He might not be trying to slander you. He probably really was wronged and said those words out of anger. If we want to settle this matter, we have to start with him." The celestial king frowned. He suppressed his anger and asked, "What? Do I have to kill the 2 captains of the Forbidden Army to prove the territorial lord's innocence? In order to settle this matter, do I have to apologize to him and restore his reputation?" "No, no, no." Divine King Fengyi quickly waved his hand and persuaded, "My lord, if you kill the 2 captains of the Forbidden Army, not only will you disappoint the Forbidden Army, you will also prove that you are biased towards the Forbidden Army and deliberately slandered the territorial lord. That will be even more difficult to explain." The governor of the Forbidden Army also nodded in agreement and said, "My lord, the Forbidden Army is your right-hand man. Their loyalty to you can be witnessed by the sun and moon. You must not disappoint the soldiers. Moreover, the territorial lord of Qin Feng and his henchmen have always been rebellious. You must not be soft-hearted." The celestial king frowned and asked, "Then according to the 2 of you, I will ignore the territorial lord of Qin Feng and immediately take over the military power of him and the other 5 territorial lords." Then I will beat them at their own game and take over the military power of the dozens of territorial lords and forces. Since I can control all the soldiers, I don't care what the other territorial lords think of me, right? Divine King Feng Yi was stunned. He shook his head with a wry smile and said, "My lord, I am afraid this is not a good idea. Those soldiers are most loyal to their territorial lords. Even if you forcibly take them in, I am afraid they will be dissatisfied and may even mutiny." Bastard! The Celestial King was so angry that he slammed the table and scolded, "The entire firmament land is my territory. Everyone is my people. Those soldiers should listen to my orders. How dare they disobey my orders and go against me? If they dare to disobey me, I will make an example out of them and behead them in public. I don't believe that they are not afraid of death." The wry smile on Divine King Feng Yi's face became more obvious. He waved his hand and said, "My lord, although you say so, we cannot take the risk now." "Then tell me, how should we solve this matter?" The Celestial King lost his patience and asked angrily. "My lord, please give us some time. This matter needs to be discussed at length." Divine King Feng Yi could only persuade the Celestial King patiently, "Let's see how the soldiers react first. It is not too late to make a decision then." Chapter 43-21. When Ji Tianqing returned to the encampment, more than 2,000 soldiers under his command had already received the news. More than 20 commanders and many guards were waiting outside the palace to welcome him. Seeing his bleak and disheartened appearance, the commanders and guards were furious. They hated the Imperial Guard and Empyrean God King Sky Universe to the core. They were only loyal to the Lord of the Qingfeng region. They were the elite subordinates who had been promoted and cultivated by the Lord of the Qingfeng region. Now that the Lord of the Qingfeng region was humiliated in public and his reputation was damaged, they could not bear it. It was no exaggeration to say that even if Ji Tianqing announced that he would lead the soldiers to rebel against Heaven Capital, the soldiers would still follow. However, Ji Tianqing had not revealed any flaws in his acting. The development of the matter was also within his expectations. Of course, he would not be impatient. Only inciting more than 2,000 soldiers under his command was far from his expectations. Therefore, he said to the commanders and guards in a bleak tone, "Inform all the soldiers to gather in the square in a quarter of an hour. I have something important to announce." The more than 20 commanders and many guards had heard some news and guessed what the Lord was going to do. They hurriedly opened their mouths to dissuade him. "My lord, please reconsider. My lord, even if the Celestial King forces you, you can't give in. We all support you. You gave us our lives. It is all thanks to your cultivation that we are where we are today. No matter what, we will not leave you." Ji Tianqing did not say much. He directly closed his eyes and said in a low and solemn voice, "Are my orders no longer effective?" The commanders trembled and hurriedly bowed. After repeatedly saying, "Yes," they turned and left to gather the soldiers. In less than a quarter of an hour, more than 2,000 soldiers gathered in the square and lined up in formation. They all looked at Ji Tianqing with complicated eyes. Ji Tianqing did not beat around the bush and said directly, "I believe that everyone has heard and is mentally prepared. That's right. Today, this old man suffered an unjust injustice. In order to prove my innocence, I dared to reprimand the Celestial King in the Great Hall. I can die to prove my innocence. This old man has no way out, but I can't implicate all of you and make you the target of the Celestial King's punishment. From this moment on, this old man will hand over the command of the army and hand over all my soldiers to the Celestial King. From now on, you must obey the command of the Celestial King and fight for the firmament land. Do you understand?" Although more than 2,000 soldiers had heard of this matter, when they heard these words from the mouth of the domain lord, they couldn't help but discuss and shout in grief and indignation. "No! Domain Lord, no matter who it is, anyone who dares to slander your reputation is our enemy. Domain Lord, we have always obeyed your orders and never dared to disobey. But this time, please forgive us for daring to defy your orders. We will definitely not carry it out. We are the people of the Qingfeng domain and the soldiers of the Domain Lord. We will only be loyal to you until we die. This subordinate's life was saved by you. My abilities and position were also given to me by you. Without your help and nurturing, this subordinate would be a lonely ghost. So, even if I die, I will never leave you. We are the people of the Qingfeng domain and we will die as ghosts of the Qingfeng domain. We will never obey anyone else's orders. Don't worry, Domain Lord. Even if we die, we will clear your name. Countless soldiers and commanders shouted at the top of their lungs, expressing their unwavering defiance of the order. Ji Tianqing tried to persuade him a few more times, and explained all the reasons clearly. But the more he persuaded them, the more he didn't want to implicate the soldiers, the more resolute they became. At this moment, the unity and loyalty of more than 2,000 soldiers to the Domain Lord of the Qingfeng domain were vividly displayed. Some Imperial Guards and Immortal King Fengyi's spies were hiding not far away. When they saw this scene, they quickly reported it to the Imperial Guard Governor and Immortal King Fengyi. Soon, Immortal King Fengyi, the Imperial Guard Governor, and Celestial King all knew about it. Whether it was the reaction of the Territorial Lord of Light Breeze or the reaction of the 2,000 soldiers, it was all within their expectations. It was obvious that the Domain Lord was disheartened because his innocence was insulted. He had no intention of rebelling. Even if he had to give up his military power, he didn't complain or instigate the soldiers to rebel. He even persuaded them to obey the order. However, the loyalty of the 2,000 soldiers to the Territorial Lord of Cool Breeze was unquestionable. This made Immortal King Fengyi feel very troubled. He couldn't think of a solution. The Empyrean God King's expression was ugly. His fists cracked as he clenched them. His hatred for the Realm Lord deepened. Reasonably speaking, all the people in the Firmament Continent were his people. They should respect and worship him more. However, the soldiers under the command of the Domain Lord only recognized the Domain Lord and dared to betray him for the Domain Lord. Wasn't it infuriating? Ji Tianqing persuaded the soldiers in every possible way, but they refused to abandon him and obey the Celestial King. He had no choice but to dismiss the soldiers. He went back to his study to rest. Of course, he didn't want to rest. He wanted to wait for news from other domains. At the same time, the 5 domain lords who were punished with him and were forced to hand over the Tiger Talisman were doing the same thing. They all gathered their soldiers and said that they would give up their military power and hand over the soldiers to the Celestial King. The result was easy to imagine. The soldiers were united against a common enemy and expressed their indignation towards Empyrean God King and the Imperial Guard. At the same time, the soldiers refused to leave. They would follow their domain lord even if they had to betray Heaven Capital. The 5 domain lords had no choice but to let the soldiers rest. Later, the 5 of them agreed to visit the domain lord of the Qingfeng domain to see what plans he had. On the other hand, the news that the domain lord of the Qingfeng domain was stopped from visiting his friends and was humiliated by the 2 captains of the Imperial Guards spread throughout Heaven Capital. The cause, process, and result of the incident were known by dozens of domain lords, experts, and tens of thousands of soldiers. For a time, everyone was talking about this matter, and it was spreading like wildfire. Originally, it had nothing to do with the other domain lords. At most, people sympathized with the domain lord of the Qingfeng domain. But in the end, the truth was revealed. It turned out that the Celestial King directed and acted out the drama in order to seize the military power of all the domain lords. It was closely related to the dozens of domain lords and tens of thousands of soldiers. The soldiers' reactions were almost the same. Since the Celestial King was so protective of the Imperial Guards and didn't take their lives seriously, why should they be loyal and obey his orders? Even if they were labeled as rebels and traitors, they would never obey the command of the celestial king. They would still be loyal to their domain lord. After all, they were the confidants of the domain lords. The domain lords would cherish and protect them. If they followed the command of the celestial king, they would only be cannon fodder. Chapter 43:22. As the tens of thousands of soldiers discussed this matter, the matter became even more exaggerated and outrageous. The actions of the two captains were described as even more arrogant, despicable, and despicable. The celestial king's favoritism and conspiracy were described as even more sinister and despicable. As a result, the soldiers' rebellious mood grew. In addition, there were many domain lords who were unwilling to hand over their military power, either openly or in secret, deliberately instigating the soldiers under their command. Since they were unwilling to give up their soldiers, the soldiers had no reason to obey the celestial king's orders. Moreover, as the matter fermented, the soldiers' hatred for the imperial guards and the celestial king continued to rise. There were no conflicts between the two sides for the time being, but the antagonism between them grew to the point where they could not coexist. One day later, God King Fengyi, God King Empyrean, and the imperial army supervisor gathered a lot of information and confirmed that 99% of the soldiers were unwilling to listen to their orders. They were all rebellious and had a rebellious attitude. Therefore, Feng Yi was responsible for spreading the news and explaining to the soldiers that the celestial king had no intention of taking back his military power. As for the celestial king's plot to frame the Cool Breeze territorial master, it was all a misunderstanding. On the other side, Feng Yi personally found Ji Tianqing and negotiated with him in a secret room. God King Feng Yi expressed that we can clear your name and punish those two captains severely. If you have no intention of rebelling and did not deliberately defame and slander the celestial king, you have to stand up and speak up to clear the celestial king's name. In addition, in order to convince the other territorial masters and the soldiers, you have to voluntarily accept the punishment and apologize to the celestial king. No one else was present when the two of them were negotiating, so no one knew what they were talking about. However, the commanders and soldiers under the Cool Breeze territorial master saw the Cool Breeze territorial master angrily scold Feng Yi and chase him out of the encampment. At that time, the Cool Breeze territorial master roared loudly, "I would rather die than submit. I would never lie against my conscience and would never harm my colleagues." God King Feng Yi also had a face of helplessness as he angrily flung his sleeves and left. Before he left, he even warned the domain lord of the Clear Wind domain not to regret his decision. Since the domain lord was so stubborn, he would not have a good ending. Therefore, the commanders and soldiers began to imagine the scene of their negotiation. Most likely, it was God King Fengyi who represented the celestial king and reprimanded the Lord of Light Wind, asking him to lie and help them. This completely infuriated the soldiers under the command of the Cool Breeze territorial lord. They all declared that even if they had to fight with the imperial guards, they would protect the region leader and would never bow to evil. At the same time, the news quickly spread, and many territorial lords and soldiers found out about it. Many domain lords had expected that God King Fengyi would negotiate with the Clear Wind domain lord and force him to change his words. The territorial lord of Qingfeng was full of righteousness. He would rather die than submit, which was within everyone's expectations. Therefore, no one doubted those rumors. They all believed them without a doubt. The dozens of domain masters and tens of thousands of soldiers felt the pressure increase and worry. They knew very well that the celestial king was going to punish the territorial lord of Qingfeng. This was to make an example out of him. After dealing with the tough territorial lord of Qingfeng, he would deal with them one by one. Many domain lords were anxious. They gathered in groups of 3 to 5 and rushed to visit the territorial lord of Qingfeng. First, they wanted to sound him out. Second, they wanted to know what the territorial lord of Qingfeng was going to do. As for the third, all the domain lords, no matter what faction they belonged to, now wanted to band together. A single domain lord or faction could only be casually punished by the Celestial King. They could not resist. Even a powerful senior like the territorial lord of Qingfeng was in a terrible fix and could only die to show his sincerity. Therefore, the other domain lords did not dare to take any chances. They could only try their best to unite. In the dead of night. In the encampment of the Clear Wind domain, Ji Tianqing lived in the Divine Palace. The double defense array was activated, protecting the entire Divine Palace and preventing the outside world from investigating the situation inside. In the spacious and bright main hall, Ji Tianqing sat at the head of the table. His face was gloomy, and his expression was bleak and lonely. More than 60 domain lords and more than a dozen leaders of factions and clans sat in several rows in the main hall. They looked like a group of desperate rebels who had gathered together to discuss whether or not to rebel. Although things had not reached the stage of rebellion yet. However, based on their current situation and mood, they were not far from betrayal. As for their loyalty to the Celestial King, it had disappeared and no longer existed. Senior Qingfeng, we are all aware of what happened to you. We deeply sympathize with you and are indignant. Although we have nothing to do with this, we are on the same side and in the same situation. Tonight, we are all gathered here. Behind closed doors, we are going to speak our minds freely and discuss countermeasures. A high Divine King Realm Domain Lord stood up and spoke, revealing everyone's thoughts and intentions. Another Domain Lord also stood up and said, the Celestial King wants to punish the chicken to warn the monkey. Senior Qingfeng is a person of virtue and prestige. He is highly respected among us Domain Lords. If the Domain Lord of Clear Wind falls, who else can resist? Therefore, the Domain Lord of Clear Wind is our bottom line. For our own safety and situation, we can't let the Domain Lord of Clear Wind fall. I have a suggestion. Let's swear an alliance tonight and advance and retreat together. Only when we are bound together and live and die together can we be qualified to negotiate with the Celestial King and get the rights we deserve. This person's suggestion immediately received the approval and support of many Domain Lords. Another Domain Lord stood up and said with righteous indignation, how loyal are we to the Celestial King and His Majesty the God Emperor? Back then, Empyrean God King gave the order and we abandoned our territory in cave abodes, bringing only our most trusted and elite soldiers to Firmament Capital. Now, the Celestial King is treating us like this. It's really disappointing. We can be loyal to His Majesty the God Emperor, and we can also fight bloody battles and risk our lives to protect Heaven Capital. However, we can't be used as pawns and cannon fodder by the Celestial King. We can't be at his mercy and be killed and sacrificed at will. Ji Tianqing waited until all the Domain Lords had given their impassioned speeches, and everyone's emotions were stirred up. Only then did Ji Tianqing speak. I can understand your feelings and support your suggestion. We can form an alliance and advance and retreat together. However, have you thought about the purpose of our alliance? To protect ourselves. How can we protect ourselves? Also, the Celestial King has been defeated by the Kenshin's attacks and has almost no strength to fight back. How long can we hold on? Can we win? When the Kenshin attacks Heaven Capital, our soldiers will fight bloody battles until all of them die. What if the Celestial King and his Imperial Guards see that the situation is not good and surrender to the Kenshin? Everyone should look further and not be constrained by the present. Think about the battle between the Celestial King and the Kenshin. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.